Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the 15th meeting of the Net Zero Energy and Transport Committee for 2025. The first item on the agenda is a decision on taking business in private. This is a decision on whether to take items 3 and 4 in private. Item 3 is the consideration of the evidence on Scotland's train and bus services, and item 4 is consideration of the committee's work programme. Are we agreed to take those items in private? We are agreed. Thank you. Our second item of this business this morning is an evidence session on the current state of Scotland's rail and bus sectors. Today we'll hear from two panels. The first includes representatives from bus operators, and the second panel includes representatives of rail operators, owners and rail freight. I'm pleased to welcome Paul White, the Director of the Confederation of Passenger Transport Scotland, David Friends, the Operating Director of Stagecoach, Duncan Cameron, the Managing Director of First Bus Scotland, and Sarah Boyd, the Managing Director of Lothian Buses. We will move straight into questions, and I've got... Sorry? Oh, yes, sorry. Having failed to do it last week, I should say that Monica sent her apologies, and Sarah Boyack, who is a substitute, is attending the meeting. I'm not going to welcome you because this is your second week and you're becoming a bit of a fixture in the committee, but you're always welcome. So, the first question, an easy question, the warmer into the back. Continuing reductions in bus services and passenger patronage over the past few years have been a problem. How can we reverse these declines and get more people on the buses and more bus routes? Who'd like to start off with that? I'll give you all a chance for that just to make sure that you're all on point. Paul, do you want to start with that?
Certainly, thank you, Convener. Yes, getting people onto buses is a raison d'etre of CPT, really, and it is a challenge that I think we look into a little bit last year with work we did with KPMG in a report entitled Trends in Scottish Bus Patronage, which I believe has been shared with committee members, but I could send it again if that would be helpful, looking at some of the barriers to patronage growth. Some of those factors include societal factors that we can't really do much about, like changes to shopping habits, online shopping, hybrid working. But some of the main detractors from bus use have been worsening journey times, car availability, ownership and congestion. The findings of the report were that it's not fully within bus operators' control to grow patronage. It really requires a partnership effort with local authorities and Scottish Government. And I think, for me, one of the key things we could do is take bus out of congestion where possible, look for priority, increase improve punctuality, shorten journey times, improve reliability, and that's all possible if we can get bus speeds more constant, more quicker. And that involves looking at how we tackle, how we handle roadworks, for instance, how we invest in bus priority measures. And doing that then allows operators to consider measures like fares or frequency availability, because operating costs fall as journey times improve and patronage increases, that virtuous cycle that's referred to in the National Transport Strategy. And that's backed up if you look at things like the Transport Focus survey results that were published earlier this year and referred to by Robert Sampson last week at committee, and some of the real drivers of passenger opinion as to what's the most important. And they look at reliability, they look at punctuality. Is the bus going to be there when I expect it to be, and how long is it going to take me to get to my destination, and is that journey time constant? Really, for me, to grow patronage and then look at reducing costs, improving bus speeds and tackling congestion is key.
Okay, David, do you want to answer that? And I mean, just to highlight it a bit more, is that rural areas maybe see declining in bus numbers and patronage because of reliability. Do you want to address those points as well, David?
I mean, I can really only talk for Stagecoach East Scotland when we talk about rural patronage. And we've actually just introduced a service change in the Carsagowrie, where we've increased the frequency through there. I guess echoing Paul's points there around how we how we make bus more attractive, how we get that modal shift. Certainly for myself, it's about that reliability and punctuality. That starts with us as the operator, making sure we've got enough drivers, we've got enough vehicles, and I think we're all sort of in that position now where it's a much improved picture as to where it was a few years ago. But then it's about what's the difference between somebody jumping in their car to go to work or to go to the shops to getting on the bus. And so there's got to be that journey time element. Where can we get priority? You know, I was on the coach this morning from Ferrytoll over to Edinburgh. There were certainly certain parts of the journey that you know, the coach was driving by parked cars and congestion, but there were other parts that the coach was in the same queue of traffic. So it's really about, you know, making bus and coach the option, because it'll be quicker for me to get to work, but also that value for money piece as well.
Okay, Duncan, do you want to add to that? Maybe one of the things we heard last week was about green and pleasant buses to travel in. So, Duncan.
Yeah, thank you. I think first of all, I'd reinforce the points that have been made. Journey times have declined for years. Traffic congestion is going in the wrong direction, and to get more people on bus, we need to prioritise bus. Full stop. And within that means bus priority to speed up, as David has put so well. You know, there are, yes, bus passenger numbers have been declining. There's no getting away from that. There are some green shoots. You know, we're seeing some passenger growth on our own networks, but where we've invested, I think the point you're alluding to, you know, what is important is investing in new fleet, and we've invested considerable money over the past 3-4 years to deliver 40% of the fleet is now net zero. So improving the attractiveness is of course important, but there's no getting away from it. Journey times are continuing to decline. We've got journey speeds in Glasgow which are close to journey speeds in London. And what that actually means is, to maintain the same level of service, maintain the same level of frequency, we need to invest more bus drivers and more vehicles just to maintain the existing service. Never mind the fact that it makes it unattractive for customers because the journey time is longer, the cost to the operator is greater, and it then means that some of what you would want to invest in new vehicles or keep prices as low as possible, you're having to invest in additional journey time like we've done in Glasgow over the past month, and we'll do so again in June to improve punctuality, because, you know, the journey times without bus priority will just continue to decline. Thank you. Okay.
And Sarah, the opposite for you in Lothian buses in Edinburgh, surely, or not?
Thank you. Yeah, so Transport Scotland published a report in 2019 for the 5 years preceding, which did report an overall drop across Scotland. Lothian was different during that 5-year period, and we had small percentage growth each year. We're back, last year we carried 116 million passengers, and we're back to 94% of our pre-pandemic numbers. It's a different dynamic now. It's made up of, you know, a different travel patterns and so on. All of the impacts of the pandemic that Paul alluded to, you know, have impacted everywhere. I guess just to echo, but I won't labour the point, what my colleagues have said, I think, you know, reliability is everything. You know, if you're going to choose to use the bus, and a whole bunch of factors have to come together for it to be a really good, seamless experience, not least the quality, the customer experience, the affordability, all of that, but actually being able to rely on it, knowing you're going to be at your destination for whatever, you know, reason that is, and being able to plan ahead is, you know, we know from our customers just how important that piece is.
Thank you. The next questions come from Mark Ruskell. Mark.
Yeah, thanks very much. So I'd like to ask you about the streams of funding that are available for both bus priority measures, but also for, you know, investment in, I guess you could call it community bus services and facilities, particularly in rural areas. So we had the Bus Partnership Fund. It was paused. It's now gone. There's now a new bus infrastructure fund. which wraps in both what that bus partnership fund did and also the community bus fund, but it's about £10 million. So I wanted to just get your view on whether you think that's adequate, what you think prioritisation should be for that spend. Paul, you're nodding the strongest. Do you want to come in first?
Thank you, Mark. Yes, so the pausing of the bus partnership fund was hugely detrimental to the bus sector, I think, because for the first time we had a large pot of money, a multi-year commitment to delivering bus priority, 500 million. I think we managed to, I think final spend was something around 26 million, or the kind of 6% of the budget before it was paused. We've had some things delivered in Aberdeen, for example, with bus gates, but a lot of plans and were developed and then paused. And for that to be then replaced by the bus infrastructure fund, which we welcome, and we'll look to do our best to see that delivered and spent appropriately. We've lost the multi-year commitment. It's a one-year fund. The quantum, I'm not sure is public yet, but I believe it is going to be around the numbers you're talking around. Is far smaller, and that's it's steps like that, and the revision of the commitment to cut car kilometres by 20% by 2030 are very damaging when you're looking at improving bus services and buying and getting commitment from all parties. I think one of the things from the Bus Partnership Fund did as a multi-year fund was saying, well, if we're delivering this, what are bus operators delivering? And they can look ahead and think, well, we can deliver. We'll invest in fleet, we'll improve frequencies. It's a very different dynamic if you're saying, well, we have 1 year's worth of money and we're not sure there's going to be money next year. What are you going to deliver? Well, you're going to be a bit more cautious about saying, well, I'm going to invest in fleet or I'm going to improve frequencies, because next year that fund could be paused and cancelled, and you don't get the improvements in bus running speeds, but you've spent the money as if that was going to be delivered. So it's a step back, probably, and we would welcome a return of a multi-year commitment.
Okay. And in terms of the community bus fund, then, that particular strand that was about improving facilities, primarily in rural areas, but building those partnerships, do you have thoughts on that? Because that, I think, has been integrated into this new fund, but we're not sure what the balance is.
I believe it has been integrated into the new fund, and I think there are some examples of where that money was used well, some examples that we managed to get some details on that it was probably not fully delivered to the benefit of bus passengers. For example, a sort of library bus, for example, maybe it was one of the schemes that was introduced through the community bus fund, where you think, well, that's useful, that's good, but is that really the purpose of the scheme? So any money that goes to bus to improve bus services, be that through infrastructure or directly to local authorities to look at community bus, is a positive.
Yeah.
But what I would like to see is the quantum increased and an agreement to retain that funding for a number of years.
Okay, so I'll turn to Sarah and then Duncan and David. I guess I'm interested from the operators of the particular projects. You talked about congestion, you talked about the need for priority infrastructure. Are there particular projects that you feel that these funds will deliver or won't deliver? Sarah?
Yes, absolutely. Thinking about the 4 local authority areas that I work with, we've got good discussions ongoing, and I can think of projects in both East and Mid-Lothian that absolutely, if we can deliver them, will make a difference to passengers, undoubtedly.
Mm-hmm. Can they be delivered within this fund, or the point that Paul's making about the need for multi-year funding? Is some of them deliverable within this financial year? Or?
I think we'll endeavour to deliver them within the financial year. We're working with local authority colleagues to try and make sure that happens. I think Paul's absolutely right. The flexibility that comes with having the funding over multi-years allows both for the scope of the project to deliver to deliver everything that's intended, and also to allow for contingency. I think that's the important point. In 12 months, can be very quick, and before we know it, you could be delivering, part of a project, and not then the full benefit.
Okay, Duncan.
Yeah, I think just to add some colour to what's already been said, I really want to reinforce, first of all, the importance of the multi-year funding. And I appreciate that it may well be a UK-wide issue, but we've participated in the Glasgow Bus Partnerships bid for the new bus infrastructure fund, and we've also participated in the North East bus partnerships bid as well. But because that money needs to be spent within the, a very small window, a lot of the projects that we've applied for are for design survey work, which, to coin what Paul said, as an operator, we're not then in a position to say, right, well, until a spade goes in the ground and there's a bus lane or some further bus priority introduced, we're not then in a position to return that to our customers. A better example would have been the previous fund, which was multi-year. The bus priority in Aberdeen, we said at the time, as soon as it was launched, there would be no financial benefit back to First. We would be reinvesting it all back to the customer, which we did because we saw the end result of that scheme. So, it's really important we see it through. I think trying to stay on a positive footing, we have a lot of work that was undertaken up until the suspension of the bus priority fund in Glasgow. Something like 6 corridors that had gone through gateway reviews with Transport Scotland. And as a partnership, we are still meeting and trying to progress those. So I very much hope that, as further opportunity comes to land those, and it isn't just about funding. Sometimes it's political will. Sometimes it's planning decisions. There are decisions being taken in Glasgow on the Avenues project. So there is money allocated to that. So that could just be the priority of where bus sits against other modes in those decisions. But we're certainly continuing to push those opportunities at where they arise.
Yeah, David.
Yeah, just building on Duncan's comments really around the work that we'd done prior to the bus priority fund. That big piece of funding being paused and or cancelled. We saw it as a sort of sea change in terms of being able to implement bus priority. And you'll appreciate, being in East Scotland, we work with a number of local authorities, so we were part of the Fife Bus Partnership, the Tayside Bus Alliance, and we'd identified corridors across the sort of that whole area where we felt that we could get real, if we could get bus priority, you can get the increased, the faster journey times, build patronage that way as well. And as with everything that's happened, we've had to refine that process slightly. So our view is pick in a couple of corridors, one in Perth, Dunkeld Road, for example, and then Lochee Road in Dundee, and really sort of focusing in on that and what we can do and whether there's still something we can achieve in this calendar year. But and we'll continue to work with the local authorities on that and the sort of bid teams. But it has obviously restricted the wider scale of what we were looking to do around bus priority.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Next questions come from Sarah Boyatt. Sarah.
Thank you, Convener. Last week, the Scottish Government abandoned their commitment to reducing car travel by 20% by 2030. So just wondering what impact you think that's going to have on bus patronage going forwards. And you've already talked about congestion. What are the opportunities that you can actually deliver to actually give people that better choice? I don't know if, Paul, you would want to kick off with that issue from the sector.
Yep, certainly. In terms of the pausing, I've already touched upon that. I think it would have been, from the outset, it was always a very ambitious target to deliver, but it was a useful way to focus the minds of operators and authorities and everyone to look to deliver measures that would cut car use and to I think what's key when you're asking people to cut car use is that there's an attractive alternative in place, which would then hopefully encourage local authorities and operators to work together to make sure that the bus was part of that alternative, alongside active travel, alongside rail, wheeling, cycling, walking. So in terms of being able to, as a catalyst for that priority for sustainable and active travel, that target played a useful role. Taking it away, that doesn't mean that work should halt, and we'll be looking to CPT, and I'm sure my operator colleagues will be working with local authorities to look to see what's still deliverable in terms of that. And again, it is, I think that the real root of it has to be, if we are saying there's going to be less car access to a city centre, we're looking to cut car use, or even just to say, if you've got a journey to make, look at the options, and maybe car isn't the option for this particular journey, that there's an available, attractive, reliable alternative in place that is affordable, and there are steps we can take to look to deliver that. Some of it is about, as we, I don't want to beat the same drum over again, but looking at freeing bus from congestion, but there's other things we can look to take forward around better bus stop infrastructure, travel information, ticketing. There's a range of things we can look to take forward, and so I'm hopeful that the cancellation or the revision of that target doesn't see that work stop.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we got in terms of feedback from last week's committee meeting was that issue about having buses people can use. That's one of the things that's come forward from young people about the bus pass, is you need a bus to use it on. And Get Glasgow Moving were in touch about the Better Buses for Strathclyde work they've been doing, and they've been working with local communities. And one of the issues that comes up is lack of access to hospitals. How do you as a sector work with local authorities, with key public sector organisations to make sure that, for example, at a hospital, you've actually got bus routes that people can use to get there? So it's not even choosing the car, but a lot of people can't use the car or don't have a car to use to get to a hospital. How do you actually increase the number of services when you've obviously got people who want to use those services? I don't know if Duncan, you would want to come in on that? Or
yeah, so I think I'd go back to much of what's been said. I mean, the bus sector's been under what you've seen across Strathclyde over the last 5 years through through all the operators is a declining patronage, that circle of decline that Paul alluded to, because journey speeds have declined and resources have had to be allocated elsewhere to maintain punctuality, and hospital services and other destinations have lost out as a result. But I mean, certainly the sector and myself as an operator, we work closely with the NHS, we work closely with the local authorities, and we're working very hard to reverse that. One example of bus priority that may well come to the city centre of Glasgow that we've presented to Glasgow Bus Partnership would involve us reinvesting the savings in 3 new services, one of which is dedicated to serve hospital locations. We're committed to working with partners to overcome that. If I can just go back to your first question, to add to what Paul said, I think the removal of the target is a huge missed opportunity. Mm-hmm. But I don't see it necessarily as an immediate threat to bus passenger numbers. I just see it as a huge missed opportunity. I think if we want to create a more sustainable society and economy and achieve net zero as quickly as we can, we need complementary policies, and that isn't just bus infrastructure. That is policies that are around land planning to support the mode of bus, and also ensuring that the transport hierarchy is applied all the time. There's been occasions on both the Aberdeen and Glasgow network where bus space has been taken away for cycle and walking, which is quite correct. It's following the transport hierarchy, but then it's placing bus on the same level as the mode of car, which isn't following the transport hierarchy. So I just reiterate my point. There's really important supporting policy decisions that that can be taken alongside bus infrastructure spend. Thank you.
Thanks. And David, did you want to come in, your company's perspective?
Yeah.
You know, how do you get new services to actually give people those choices?
It's probably worth me touching on the 16 service I mentioned earlier in terms of the Carsa Gowrie. So we've increased the frequency through the cars, but to achieve that, we've had what we've done previously. It ran from Arbroath through to Perth and terminated at Perth Royal Infirmary. We now, the 16 service, we've introduced that increased frequency between Perth and Dundee, but as a result of the time it takes to get from Perth City Centre up to PRI and back, we weren't able to provide that extra frequency. We weren't able to include that in the loop. So what we've done is had to be sensible about it, look at what we can do from a service point of view. There are services in Perth City Centre, the 1 and 2, which are our most frequent, that travel up past the hospital. So we advertise that as a direct link up to the hospital from Perth City Centre. But I guess in terms of that engagement, it's not just about working with the local authorities or the institutions, it's listening to the customer as well. So if there are new journey options that we can introduce, then we'll look at doing that. It's engaging with the customer around that as well, listening to the local authorities. We meet with the local authorities every couple of months. They'll feed into us the feedback that they're getting as well. But ultimately, we've got a sort of finite level of resource that we can use, and we do try and do that as best we can. And we have to consider where are the majority of customers using the service, where do they want to go, and prioritise that. But it doesn't mean that we can't look at being a wee bit smarter in terms of what we do with our services.
Okay, and Sarah, can I come to you, because your bus numbers have actually gone up, and you've got the biggest growing population in Scotland to deal with and thousands of new houses. So how do you actually deliver those new services to give people the opportunity to actually use the buses rather than the car?
For us, it's about strong connections where you might not have a direct service from everywhere to everywhere. That's not possible. However, having a strong network with high frequency services, with really good access to journey planning, I think that's another key part. So thinking about some of the new developments that we've got from outside Edinburgh, where people are travelling to hospitals, we know from other parts of the Lothian regions, it's really important that there's easy access to information, that you are then able to travel on the network with simplicity. And when we've got data to suggest lots of people making the same connections, we're then able to look at whether there is something that can be done around a direct service, but there's a considerable amount of additional cost associated with that. So it needs to be then that there's the same the right number of people travelling for that to be able to be built as a business case.
And when you do that, you're then going to generate more income, so it's a kind of win-win. Is that how you view it as a company, having had those strategic discussions with other partners?
Yeah, I mean, we take a holistic view of the whole network. So it allows us to run buses at late at night, early in the morning, Sundays, all of that, where where perhaps you would be looking at supported services. That's where the Lothian model does, the money is reinvested within the company.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that came back from the feedback from last week, was that you've got a model that works. To what extent have you got the capacity to do that in other parts of Scotland to get the numbers up at that kind of scale? I don't know if that's a question for you, Paul, maybe.
Certainly. So in terms of if the question is Lothian as a municipal operator an advantage because it is a municipal operator, then I would just clarify that Lothian isn't the only operator that has seen patronage increase. If you look at the last Scottish Transport statistics, I think bus passenger numbers increased by 13% from the previous year. Now, part of that is COVID recovery, of course, as we're still on that, so it's difficult to differentiate what's COVID recovery from actual generated patronage growth by other means. And Lothian, a CPT member, runs a fantastic service. So do other CPT members. I think Lothian, and I'm hopeful Sarah will back me up and not come back and correct me in following this up, have the benefit of some other factors, like Edinburgh doesn't have a suburban rail network like Glasgow has, competing against it, and Lothian and Edinburgh City Council also has a fair network of bus lanes. It could always be more, and car parking charges are quite high in the city centre, as you probably noticed. So there's factors there that probably help Lothian, which is already a fantastic team, to deliver a fantastic service. And I think to take that model and just say, well, if we transplant that regulatory model to another area, you'll have the same results, neglects the other factors that go into the provision of the services in Edinburgh.
I suppose what I'm thinking is all of it to actually get that passenger increase, to see what more we can do. Thank you.
Just before we leave this, I don't know, Sarah or Duncan, whether you could help me on this. If you're expanding for whatever reason and you have to buy a new bus, what's the cost of that new bus and what's the lead time for getting it delivered, roughly? Because you've probably negotiated special deals which you don't want the other to know about. But what are we talking about roughly on the cost for a bus, and how long does it take for it to arrive? Sarah, go on.
Thank you. You've alluded to the sensitivities, I guess, that go with this. It depends on whether it's a diesel bus or an electric bus.
OK, let's say a Euro 6
difference.
single deck bus, roughly.
Roughly £300,000, between £280,000 and £300,000.
OK.
Yeah, in terms of lead time, that varies usually from manufacturer to manufacturer. And again, electric, in our experience, is taking longer to bring to market than diesel did previously.
OK, so as you answered the diesel, Duncan could answer the electric one. How much is an electric bus, and what's the lead time?
Yeah, you're probably talking, near 300,000. Again, 6 months. I think the point on the electric fleet is the premium for it really hasn't come down to any considerable amount. So that differential, the industry is, has had the support of capital funding in the past and is now having to we're going to have to continue to fill that gap going forward with investment.
So it's a substantial investment for buses, and that's what I was trying to get to. So thank you for that. The next question is from Bob.
Thanks, Convener. Good morning, everyone. So in 2019, we passed legislation in this place, the Transport Scotland Act. We hoped it would increase patronage, it would improve bus services. I think history has told us that COVID is part of the factors as well that hasn't really delivered what we'd have wanted it to deliver. What are the reasons for that, according to industry? Can I finish with Duncan Cameron? Because I have a very specific Glasgow point in relation to the 2019 Act. I would like to ask a specific question about. Maybe finish with Mr Cameron. But so why did that 2019 Act not deliver? And how could we maybe make it deliver, Mr White?
Is there particular aspects of the 2019 Act you want to...
The bits in relation to buses, funnily enough, and Mr Cameron's going to follow up about the provision for bus service improvement partnerships, which I think industry would have said were far preferable to franchising, regulation and all of that kind of thing, which I'm very sympathetic to, but it's about how that 2019 Act can empower industry to provide a better service. So what in the Act has worked, hasn't worked, what might have been done differently, Mr White?
So within the 2019 Act, I think the phrasing was increasing the toolkit that was open to local authorities in terms of regulatory models to pursue. The main ones being a bus service improvement partnership, a franchising model and municipal operation. Not long after the Act was enacted, we had COVID, and that has really been put a pause, and you have to look at everything through that lens for a number of years. So, for example, when it comes to the franchising model and the BSIP model, guidance for the delivery of those models has not been published yet. There's government guidance on the municipal model, but we are expecting guidance on the franchising model and the BSIP model at some point spring, summer 2025. So not too distant future. So in terms of our ability to actually work with local authorities to deliver any of these measures based on the Transport Act, that hasn't really been possible because the legislative process hasn't fully been completed in terms of the secondary legislation and the guidance. There are other aspects of the Act. There's the aspects of smart ticketing, and we've seen the smart ticketing consultation released just maybe two, 3 weeks ago. So that will hopefully lead to sorry, I'm saying smart ticketing, bus open data is the phrase I mean, bus open data consultation that was published 2 or 3 weeks ago. So it's very difficult to say what could the Act have done differently because we've not been able to fully deliver the content of the Act.
Okay, so it's reasonable to say, Mr White, the jury's still out in relation to the provision of that Act rather than it hasn't been successful. But I don't want to paraphrase you, but we have to consider the evidence we've heard. Is that roughly where you are?
Yes, I mean, we haven't had the ability to deliver a bus service improvement partnership to then say, oh, that model hasn't really worked, so we should look at a franchising model, or we can look elsewhere. We can look at English examples and draw comparisons. I think we'll take some learnings from them. But in terms of the delivery of these models within Scotland, the jury's still out. I think.
Okay. Sarah, you're nodding your head when Paul was making some comments there. Do you want to add anything to that?
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's important to remember just how much the pandemic had an impact right at the beginning as the legislation came in. So we were at 10% of our previous passenger numbers. Lothian had 1,800 people furloughed. We had 2 of our 3 city depots completely closed for right through until September of that year to get all 3 open again. So, I mean, the impact was just enormous. And yeah, I think it's taken us till now to get back to 94–95% of where we were. I think where we are now with the Act is welcoming the opportunity to work in partnership with local authorities, Bus Partnership Fund, Infrastructure Fund. I think there's, it can't be underestimated. We've not really had a chance to deliver on a lot of that yet, and I think that's where it was disappointing to see what happened with the Bus Partnership Fund. But hopefully now there's an opportunity to move on and to have good, strong dialogue with local authorities and deliver for passengers.
Can I just check, Sarah Boyd, and I will return to the fund that you say you're disappointed in relation to the changes in relation to that. Has the removal of that fund and the replacement fund, which was diminished in value and wasn't multi-year, has that prevented strategic thinking, or has it just delayed the strategic action? Because those are 2 different things. Is the strategic thinking still taking place, Sarah? It's just that you can't act on the ground, so to speak, until you're clear about what the budget lines look like?
I think certainly within Lothian we had our teams working on projects with local authority colleagues that we were hopeful would be delivered. There's that work is ongoing. You know, there's I mentioned earlier there's a really good discussion with Mid Lothian that hopefully we will deliver that project.
Okay, that's very helpful. Before I get to Mr Cameron, David, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I would just really touch upon what Sarah's just said there around, you know, I think pre-COVID and certainly with the introduction of the bus priority funding, there was a real, certainly within Stagecoach, there was a real enthusiasm around where we were going, the direction of travel, and to use a pun in terms of that funding and the real difference it could make to bus journey times effectively, and then the benefit, the sort of offshoots of that as well. And those discussions continued through COVID. It was only obviously till the last sort of 12 months or so that there was a bit of a blocker put on those. But they're still happening. They're still, you know, there's still ideas that we're putting forward, working with local authorities as well. It's just really trying to restart those not restart them, but sort of get a bit of impetus put back into them.
I think that's very helpful. That's quite nice. That brings one to Mr Cameron. And the reason I've kept yourself to Mr Cameron, because I've got some quite significant constituencies' interest to some of the stuff. But first of all, I suppose for clarity, I was having a look to see, well, where are we with bus service improvement partnerships in relation to my area? And of course, First Group and First Glasgow would say there's always been a strategic relationship with SPT and local authorities anyway before the 2019 Act came into place. So when you were speaking earlier about the Glasgow City Regional Bus Partnership, that didn't require BSIPs, because what I'm particularly interested in is the strategic bus corridor plans, 3 of which are particularly interested to be Dumbarton Road, Great Western Road and Mary Hill Road for fairly obvious constituency reasons.
Yeah.
So where are we with that, and did this not require any powers within the 2019 Act? Could that happen in partnership anyway?
So, yeah, I mean, the funding, the Bus Priority Fund or Bus Improvement Fund, the 500 million, probably drove the an overhaul of what was a voluntary partnership previously, and the setting up of the Glasgow Bus Partnership. That has, obviously, the funding stopped. We've been key players with the newly appointed independent chair, George Hazel, SBT, Glasgow City Council and the other bus operators, which we work closely with through the Glasgow Bus Alliance, to take the partnership forward. We are keen to see a voluntary, legally binding partnership, because we believe it's important everybody has some confidence in one another in terms of those partnership commitments, because anything before hasn't been legally binding, and we believe that's one of the reasons why we've struggled to get stuff across the line. And I'm confident that, within the 2019 Act we can find a way, and one of my UK colleagues, our head of policy, is giving the partnership significant support towards moving to that. So that is happening in the background. There's a number of working groups set up, one being infrastructure and ticketing, and that will then is picking up those key corridors, because, as you rightly say, we have 6 that effectively are on the shelf. Had a lot of work through consultancy engineers to progress to SBC stage with Transport Scotland, and we'll continue to take these forward. I think the other points I would make, whilst bus priority is just hugely important for the reasons I referred to on deteriorating journey speeds over the last 10-15 years, there is still a lot of good work taking place. Glasgow probably has one of the highest proportions of net zero fleets in the UK. First, we've invested more than we've made in profit in recent years in terms of 200 plus zero emission buses now, and the operators have also got together with integrated ticketing, which was also mentioned earlier, with the one ticket to use any bus service across Glasgow, the Tripper ticket, and by the operators getting together and finding a way to make that a mobile ticket, we've grown that integrated ticket by 300%. So, within the confines of the partnership, there is still lots of good progress being made, but yeah, that bus infrastructure is very important. Okay, so is it reasonable to say that should more money become available, partners could fleet of foot decide how that would be prioritised for bus infrastructure, because a lot of the heavy lifting has been done in relation to this? Yeah, absolutely. No, absolutely. Okay. The money has effectively been spent already on appraisals. Yes. Okay. So the other question I would ask convener would be: I don't drive. I don't cycle. I've got a young family. I am heavily dependent on buses, predominantly First Glasgow buses. So those bus corridors, particularly Mary Hill Road, but also Great Western and Dumbarton Road, have a profound impact in me and my family's ability to get out, about and around. When you have these discussions with partners, the travelling public, I'm an MSP, so I've got a separate influence I can bring to bear, but travelling public who maybe have a travelling profile similar to myself, what input do they have in any of this? So I think, I'd go back to the Aberdeen example. We reached out to partners in terms of returning that, returning the benefits on journey speeds. We reached out to partners, and that included Bus Users Scotland. So Greg, who I know you've met, is already part of the Glasgow Bus Partnership and contributes. And you know, those benefits would be considered and then consulted through passengers and also political representatives such as yourself.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Convener.
Bob, I think, Kevin, you've got some questions you want to ask.
Thank you, Convener. The concessionary fare schemes are immensely popular, and I think they're here to stay. But some have argued that the money is invested in the concessionary fare scheme, or some of the money is invested in the concessionary fare schemes, could be moved to supporting other service provision. What are your views on that, please? And if we could start with Sarah, please. Thanks.
The concessionary fare subsidy is a subsidy to the passenger. For me, it helps keep fares affordable for everybody. You know, it's a huge part of our business model. I suppose in this, I don't mean this to sound selfish, I suppose in the context of an urban network, as you know, Lothian predominantly are, that actually I would hope that concessionary fares is not looked at as a means by which it could be changed in order to bring about change elsewhere in Scotland. I think in itself it's so important, and that the change that absolutely recognise may well be needed. But actually, I would hope that it's not going to be something that's then detracted from concessionary fares.
Thank you, Paul, please.
The concession schemes great benefit to those who have access to them. Clearly, I think to stress they are payment for a service provided. As Sarah said, it's subsidy for the passenger, but in terms of our sector, a delivery partner for a scheme that
a subsidy for the passenger, but also a subsidy for the company.
No, I would disagree, Mr Stewart, because the scheme is based on the premise that the operator should be no better or worse off for participating, and that's why the reimbursement rate for carrying an older or disabled person is 52.1% of the average single fare, not 100%, for example. The rate is reduced to ensure that when our work is completed with Transport Scotland, the operators are basically have taken into account what type of journey the passenger would have made. Would it be a return journey, for example, or what are the operating costs? A whole series of factors go into to ensure that it is no better or worse off, and we are delivering for the passenger.
But the realities quite simply are, if it wasn't for the concessionary fare scheme, some routes would not exist, so companies wouldn't be able to attract other passengers, so she would not be making profit.
I'm not criticising the schemes, and I'm not saying that as a commercial intervention to the market they haven't shaped the network, which they clearly have. So the operators will have shaped the look to serve areas where people will board with a concessionary pass. But in terms of whether the schemes should be amended and budget moved to a different scheme or subsidy, it's a purely political decision, and as a delivery partner in the scheme, it's not for me, I would say, I don't have. All I would say is, and as I look at some of the work that's going on in England on bus support, is my ask would be that the quantum that's given to the sector in any reform shouldn't reduce. Yeah, I have there's no CPT position on whether or not the concession schemes should be amended.
David, please.
Yeah, just to echo Sarah and Paul's points, I think the feedback we get around the concession scheme from the customer is really positive. Particularly, the over 60 scheme's been around a number of years now, almost 20 years. But with the under 22s, the feedback we get from younger people, children, in terms of the benefits of the scheme, what it's allowed them to do, travel to and from. My view is that we would very much like those schemes to remain in place, and that the element of that shouldn't be diverted elsewhere for other parts of bus funding, because the feedback that we've got from customers, particularly around under 22, is it's been a real sort of game changer for them.
Thank you. Duncan, please.
Yeah, I think I'd reiterate the point that the schemes have always worked on the principle of a no better, no worse scenario for the operators. So, just, you know, there could be potential consequences for making the changes, which I think has been alluded to. To reiterate David's point, under 22 schemes obviously been a huge success for young people. And has positively affected other areas of the economy as well, I'm sure. And I think as operators, you know, well, I think all of us, we've got a huge opportunity for it to be a strategic pillar for people to travel more sustainably beyond the age of 22. As an operator, we would love to get into understand the data at which people are leaving the scheme, so we could start to consider some attractive fares to bridge them to that commercial product, and that's something we're continuing to work on. But we see the under 22 scheme as a huge strategic ally to keep people on bus later in life.
So let me play devil's advocate a little bit here, Duncan, because you know, supporting service provision by other means and not necessarily government monies would be a good thing, would it not? So can I ask, there has been quite a lot of talk today and last week around about bus priority measures and you know, the advantage that there is to that, as you see it, an increasing patronage. Now, if government was to invest more in those schemes, for example, which is likely to increase your profitability, would your company, and I'll ask the others as well, would your company use some of that profitability to increase service provision?
So if specifically, if that investment was going into non-concessionary funding, you're referring to things like bus priority funding, etc. Yeah. Yeah, we would. Like what we've done in Aberdeen, like what we've proposed in Glasgow, we absolutely would. I think, you know, I referred to Bob's question on which was on partnership. You know, a fundamental principle behind a partnership is everyone playing a part. So we've always gone into these discussions if resources were saved through journey times being sped up, then that resource saving would be returned to the passenger. And you know, as Bob quite rightly has asked me, it's got to work for the passenger. That's obviously important. That may well be in services that don't currently operate. It may well be services that do operate, but more journeys to make them more frequent. It might even be initiatives like we introduced in Aberdeen to make fares more affordable. So yeah, there's a range of ways in which we would reinvest, but increasing service provision is certainly one of them.
It would be fair to say that bus priority measures are not particularly popular in Aberdeen. Do you think if you were to continue and enhance support for increased service provision because of those bus priority measures, that the public would become more accepting of bus priority measures?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say we've learned a lot in what's taken place in Aberdeen over the past 18 months. First of all, you know, I go back to the KPMG report that Paul cited. You know, for every £1 spent, £4.55 is reinvested into the economy. I'm not sure we've done a good enough job collectively helping business forums understand that and see the importance of the bus as a mode. But yeah, absolutely. I think timing's important. I think it's important that people see if there is a change, that there is also a benefit coming alongside it, and it's important that that benefit is impactful. I agree.
Okay. David, Stagecoach's view in supporting service provision through increased profit?
Yeah, I mean, we signed up to that. That was one of our commitments when we joined the Tayside Bus Alliance and Fife Bus Partnership. That was one of the things that we stated.
Okay, Sarah, please.
The Lothian model is already different, I guess, in terms of how it operates right now. I think underpinning the point you're making about improving reliability, that enables the intelligent travel decisions for someone to go from 2 cars to 1 or 1 car to no car. Like all of that, anything that is a genuinely attractive proposition that you would choose to do yourself, I think absolutely is welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Convener.
So, Kim and Sarah, I think you've got a follow-up on that.
Just in reference to the under-22s, what work is the sector doing to keep them on the bus when they hit 23? I know quite a lot of young people are not doing driving lessons now. It's really expensive. But what are you doing to market the opportunity for people who've left further higher education or are in employment? Are you doing partnerships at regional levels with employers to persuade young people to keep on the bus? Is there an opportunity here in terms of the reducing emissions, but also generating more income for the sector? I don't know if any of you've got any thoughts on that.
Sorry if I can jump in there. We have a partnership agreement currently with St Andrews University, so we offer sort of highly discounted travel for staff and for students, for travel between for anywhere really travelling into St Andrews University. And we've seen the benefits of that from, obviously, students moving to either work for the university or for staff as well. So our focus is really around, once younger people leave school, leave higher education, they will then move to work. And it's really trying to work with businesses, setting up sort of business-to-business ticketing and that kind of thing to try and retain some of the, we don't want under-22s to enjoy bus travel, to use buses, and then they get to under 22, that free element of the journey is removed, and then they disappear back to private car or wherever else. We want to try and retain them, so our focus is around building those partnerships with businesses that they're likely to go on and work for.
Yeah, Paul, is there an opportunity for doing that right across the country with the sector, with the business community, with the public sector?
Yes, I think so. I think Eilidh from the Scottish Youth Parliament had some excellent points around this, and young people and the use of bus and the importance of bus at last week's committee. I think the scheme is still quite young, and as the evaluation of the scheme continues, I hope that the travel patterns and the views of those ageing out of the scheme are evaluated properly, and that information will be probably quite helpful to shape the response of the sector. It will be for my operator member colleagues to look maybe locally or regionally at what are the best local or regional solutions to that, and whether it's working, as David is doing, with further education or with businesses or just a general fares offer. That will be things we discuss as we get more information on the scheme, and it might be we look to work with Transport Scotland on data, so we know where there are areas where lots of people might be ageing out of the scheme, or there's particular issues of increased car use. But yeah, I think it's important that we consider what happens as people hit 22 years old.
Thanks. Thanks, Convener.
So we're sort of, well, a long way through, halfway through the session, but we're not halfway through the answers. So I know, David, Duncan and Sarah, it's always attractive to say you're better than each other. I'm sure that where you agree, though, it would be helpful to me if you could just say agreed if you agree with somebody else, rather than building on it too much, because I want to get all the questions in. Is probably a cat-handed way of saying that. So the next questions come from Mark.
So I wanted to turn to the flat bus fares. Get your thoughts on that, given that we have got a flat bus fares pilot that will be launched in Scotland at some point, I think, before April next year. Sarah, can we start with yourselves? Because you've pretty much got a flat fare, haven't you, already, within Lothian?
We do have a flat fare. I think in relation to a potential pilot, I think it would be important for us to understand what the exit strategy would look like for that. I think that's whilst it's been announced, there's so little known about that, so I'm keen to understand more about it.
Yeah. Paul, thoughts on flat bus fares? Also anything that we can learn from England where it's been introduced?
Yes, there has been an evaluation of the first year of the flat fare, the DfT's £2 flat fare scheme, which it's difficult to look at patronage growth because it's introduced at a time of COVID recovery, so how do you pull that out? But the evaluation suggests that it hasn't been, the patronage growth hasn't been marked. And also for value for money rates is low value for money cost benefit ratio of 0.7 to 0.9 I get for every pound invested. So it's a good measure to consider. We've probably gone a different route with free travel for under 22s as we talk about government financial constraints and how to best spend what's limited budget to support bus. I'm not sure a further fares offer is the best use of the money.
Mm-hmm. Do you think it could help to address that cliff edge with folks who are turning 22 and are then subject to full price fares?
It's another fares offer. It's another commercial intervention to the market, and I think one of the things that narratives that I've seen, even within the STUC report that was published yesterday, is around a criticism of the commercial market, because if you look at how much public sector money is coming into compared to commercial revenue, and the STUC would say, look at the growth in public sector support for the sector compared to commercial revenue, this must mean that the commercial sector is failing. When really these are schemes that have been introduced that take commercial revenue, so for example, the 322 scheme from people under 21, and replace it with the government paying that fare rather than the passenger, so it imbalances the look of that. So I think it's possible that if you had free travel to under 22 and then £2 flat fare from that age till people hit the age of 60, it's a lot of public sector money, and really when you look at cost as a factor for passengers looking at transport focus data, it's certainly one of them, but it's not the lead. I think people would actually want access to a bus and a reliable bus and a quick bus, and then cost is something that hopefully my operator member colleagues would be able to look at as that was delivered, rather than fully focus on cost at the detriment of money that could be spent on bus priority.
Okay, David, Duncan, do you have thoughts on the pilot? I mean, do you welcome the pilot? Do you want it in your area? Or should it go somewhere else? How do you think a pilot should run?
I think it's probably just a couple of points I'd reiterate that Paul said. First of all, the benefit of it being a pilot makes it a lot more controlled in terms of circumstances to understand the benefit, unlike the English experience. But, the feedback we're having from customers, bus users, and the transport survey is, the main objective is speeding journeys up, as opposed to fare charge. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. So, would you want to see a pilot introduced in an area where those journey times were being speeded up through bus priority? I mean, does it make sense to bring all these interventions together? I think that was your point earlier on. Yeah.
The only risk is that you then don't. In introducing a pilot at the same time as a whole host of other complementary measures, as you're not able to measure that pilot. So I'd suggest if there was a pilot running, then it was in a sort of clean environment where you could measure the benefit of it.
David?
Yeah, agree with what Duncan said.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Mark. Douglas, you've got some questions you'd like to ask.
Yeah. Thank you, and I just want to ask about speeding up journey times first of all, because a regular bus user, but something that frustrates me is how long it sometimes takes at a bus stop for people to get off and then back on. So is there any ways that could be sped up? Is there any, Duncan?
First of all, any time disembarking from the stop, that is something that is a lot more under the operator's control as opposed to journey time. So we're in the process of investing in brand new ticket machines. They will come this year. The ticket machine effectively now does everything. So it's got the real-time information, it's got all the commercial offering, and there's a lot of data there. And the importance of investing in brand new ticket machine where the data capacity is so much greater will mean that that transaction time will be sped up. So I think operators can do that's certainly within our operators' control. That's what we're doing.
Okay. Anybody else got anything to add on that? Sarah?
Yeah, I think it's one of the things that helps to make the experience attractive, and I think things like contactless payment. That's played a huge part in enabling that journey to be as seamless, as quick, that can the boarding experience to go well for a customer.
Yeah, no, I agree. The whole app thing, I think, is just so much better. But it's the bus stops that really get on my nerves. Moving on to a different question. We've often heard about antisocial behaviour, and it's on the rise within the buses. Is that true or not? Is it really just a bit of an urban myth? David?
I think from our point of view, certainly it varies from area to area. We operate in East Scotland, so we operate in parts of Fife, Perth, Kinross, Dundee, and I would say that the rise in antisocial behaviour, whether that be on bus or whether that be around bus stations, because we've got to remember that bus stations are typically open till late at night, so it will be a place for people to gather. But our view is generally it's been proportionate in terms of the increase in the number of passengers travelling has been proportionate to the increase in antisocial behaviour. In East Scotland, certainly, I can't obviously speak for everybody.
Do you see any link in the free bus travel for under-22s and a rise of antisocial?
I would say proportionately, in terms of the patronage going up, has seen a rise in antisocial behaviour to a similar level. But a lot of the antisocial behaviour we see isn't necessarily on bus. It can be in and around bus stations. It can be vandalism, all different kind of things.
And obviously we had that fatality in Elgin.
Yeah.
Paul, anything to add?
Criminal and antisocial behaviour is on the rise in general. The under-22 scheme is a catalyst for more young people to be on and around bus, and so we have seen a rise in instances of criminal and antisocial behaviour on bus. We're looking to collect evidence on a number of collect data, I should say, in the number of instances, so we have some kind of baseline that we can measure the work we're doing with Transport Scotland to try and help mitigate that. But it's certainly a real thing.
Mm-hmm. Duncan, is there anything you can do about repeat offenders, or?
Yeah, I think we're working. I mean, as you'd expect, we're working with agencies. We're working with Transport Scotland. I think it's a challenge across society, but we've got to work together to make sure the consequences are appropriate.
So, do you think we should be removing the entitlement to free bus travel if it's been abused?
My answer, what I would say to that is if the offence is appropriate, yes, I think we should.
Mm-hmm. Sarah?
Yeah, it's important to remember it is a minority of young people, absolutely. It's an incredible scheme. It's enabled some superb travel patterns now in our young people. But if you're the person involved in the incident on the bus, if you're the driver, if you're the victim of something, if you're the other passengers, some of the experiences and the stories are horrendous. And so you asked about repeat offenders. I think absolutely, and I think it's really heartening now to see the work that is being done to try and pull agencies together in order to get to actually not have a scheme that could be abused really badly in some ways. As I say, it is a minority, but that shouldn't be. I don't think we should kind of underestimate the impact, though, even if it is still in a minority.
And are you having to take more steps to sort of protect drivers?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have gathered and track our incidents to the level of splitting them in terms of age, so that we do have proper evidence. We're working really closely with the union. I know that there's a plan that the unions have put together, and I think everything that's suggested within that plan makes absolute sense. It's a societal issue. It's not just buses, but I think actually coming together and the scheme being viewed as something that's a privilege, but it's not something that should then be abused. I think that's really important that we do that, all of us together.
Mm-hmm. Paul, you want to come back in?
Yes, I just wanted to give an overview of some of the work we're doing on this. It might be helpful. We do believe that there should be a deterrent for repeat or serious offences, and that looks at hot listing cars, so removing the right to travel. But we see that as very much a an extreme endpoint. I think I echo what Sarah says about the scheme being fantastic and most people who use the scheme behaving perfectly. But alongside that establishment of a deterrent, we're also working with Transport Scotland and looking to develop some kind of form of education module to go into schools to help young people understand the impact of their actions or the behaviour that's expected at the bus stop and on bus. So we also chair a working group, and that working group actually meets again tomorrow with Transport Scotland, Police Scotland, Unite, ATCO and some other stakeholders to consider how to mitigate antisocial behaviour and to learn from other places. I think tomorrow we're learning about the example of transport safety officers, which are used in areas of England where it's people boarding the bus, clearly marked as safety officers who can look to diffuse incidents or take action when incidents take place. So it's we're doing a lot of work not to demonise young people in any way, but to help educate and then hopefully deal with the issue.
And Sarah mentioned capturing data. Do we have enough data on this issue? Duncan, David, do you capture?
We, as similar to what Sarah said, we've got a tracker, so every antisocial behaviour incident's assigned a reference number, and we follow that through with whether it's a school issue, whether it's take it up with the police, then we'll follow that through, provide CCTV evidence, all that kind of thing.
Duncan, you do the same?
Absolutely the same.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Camilla.
Just before I go to Mark, one of the suggestions was last week, I think, if I remember rightly, was that a lot of young people getting on the bus at the same time, and the behaviour of a group is more difficult to say is antisocial if they're all working together. Just lots of noise, lots of things going on, and therefore it was important to identify that. But you're clear in your mind that the antisocial behaviour has increased with the concessionary travel for young people. I'm seeing Sarah and Duncan nodding and David nodding. Okay, sorry, Mark, just to you.
Yeah, you're operating services in England as well as Scotland, and I think David as well. Yeah. Do you see any differences between England and Scotland in terms of antisocial behaviour?
I think I'd recognise that it's a societal issue. So, I've got 5, there's 6 business units in First, the other 5 are England and Wales, and right across the 6 we're seeing increases in antisocial behaviour. So, I think both apply.
But England doesn't have a concessionary travel scheme for under-22s?
No. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I'm not in I mean, I can do some work and submit a response to you in writing. My point is, it's on the rise. What the rates are between ourselves and England, I'm not sure.
Right. But you can't say whether under-22s facilitates antisocial behaviour, because what you're saying is that in England it's the same problem.
No, other than, like what David said, where we've seen, growth in under-22 passengers, there's, so if there's more people on the buses, there might be more antisocial behaviour as a small proportion. Yeah. David?
Yes, similar to Duncan, I don't have the figures to hand for our English colleagues, but I would also make the point that antisocial behaviour in and around buses has always been there. It's not a new thing.
Oh, it's always been there, right? Okay.
Yeah. There has always been. I've worked for Stagecoach for 17 years in Manchester for 6 of those, and I can assure you it was an issue there as much as it is up here.
Yeah, right. Thanks for that.
Thank you. I get the next question. I wasn't telling you all to hurry up so I could get my question in, but ever since I've been dealing with transport in the Parliament, we've heard of a mishmash of timetabling so that you can't get a bus to get a train to get a ferry. And there seems to be a lack of coordination, integrated travel. Are you addressing that? And the answer can be yes, and give one example of what you're doing, because I don't think it's ever been effectively dealt with. David, do you want to give an example?
Yes, the introduction of the Leavenmouth railway line, we worked with ScotRail and the local authority there to ensure that the sort of network of services, whether it be buses feeding into the train network, worked well and worked together, so they aligned effectively.
You're going to roll it out across the country then?
Sorry?
You're going to roll it out across the rest of the country?
Well, we'll see.
Okay. Duncan?
Yeah, probably my examples not so much timetabling, but certainly ticketing. We worked closely. We participate in the SPT zone card scheme, which covers rail, bus, subway, etc.
Did we get an integrated ticketing scheme for one thing, but not for the rest of Scotland, Sarah? I don't know. You probably can't answer that, Duncan. You can. COP26 had an integrated scheme, did it? One ticket.
Yeah.
But it doesn't seem appropriate to roll it out for anyone else.
Yeah, well, I'd argue zone card at the moment in the Strathclyde area is integrated. I'm not aware of one covering the whole of Scotland, or anything. Obviously the COP26 ticket applied to COP26.
I'm just trying to get the view that if you leave your house in the morning, having booked your travel right the way across from, I don't know, Edinburgh on to an island, it would be much easier if you could do that. Sarah, do you want to comment on integrated ticketing and travel connections?
Within the Lothian area, we participate in the one ticket, so that does allow the multi-operator that you're talking about. I guess if you think back to where the conversation started and what has changed, so the idea of having one piece of plastic that would be in your hand that you would use on multiple operators, and the cost that would come at, actually now that there are so many contactless schemes in place, I think there's a need to look at what is it you're actually trying to achieve with that, and that absolutely there might be, the odd journeys where people are making, those huge numbers of connections, but that actually, how best do you support that with where technology has now gone? I think that's now a different answer.
And I think that if I remember rightly, when we had the transport bill, that not everyone has access to contactless payments. So prepayment cards, like the Oyster card, were useful for a group of society who didn't have prepayment cards, which enabled them to tap in and pay, so they could actually put it in advance. Yes, Bob, and then I'm going to go to Sarah.
Convener, I just want to put something on the record, given Mr Cameron's comment about the Strathclyde zone card scheme. The recent revisions of it and the redrawing of the zone card boundaries had a devastating impact on many of my constituents to their detriment, and they will no longer be using the zone card because of that. I took it up with SPT. I'm not seeking to explore it here, but any of my constituents watching this today would want me to put that on the record. An absolutely devastating impact to my constituents, Convener.
I'm just going to leave that as a comment, and I'm going to go to Sarah with the next question.
Yeah, the other joined-up thinking issue is not just tickets, but it's actual timetables. In terms of linking in different types of services. Just thinking about how you make that information accessible to people as well. What work's being done with the different sectors so that people actually have opportunities to use different services.
Sorry, no, if I come in, I think
Off you go.
Two examples would be in the Glasgow area. I mean, first of all, as an operator, we publish all modes on our app because we believe, given a number of people will make multiple journeys, we want to make it as easy as possible. So I can leave my flat in Glasgow and I'll have I'll know in real time, when my bus is going to take me to the subway station and for onward travel. And another example would be the Glasgow Bus Partnership, the on-street. As a result of working with operators and SPT, the on-street publicity is now much more improved, and it's one standard presentation, so it's much easily understood by the customer. Thank you.
Anyone else want to come in on that?
Okay.
Thanks.
Douglas, you've got a question, and there's a few follow-ups, I think.
Yes, I was going to ask about net zero buses. Obviously, the Scottish Government have stopped their funding for, I think, the capital side of net zero buses. Is that going to have an impact on what you purchase going forward? Or are we in a position now where there doesn't need to be any government support for the purchase now? Paul, I see your hand going up.
Yes, certainly. I'll jump in. Yes, so ScotZeb and its predecessor SULEBS played a very helpful role in kick-starting the work of operators in delivering a zero-emission fleet. I think with the delivery of ScotZeb 2, when the vehicles arrive through this year, the Scottish fleet will be up to over 25% or just over zero emission. Now, if you compare that to England, which is about 4 to 5% zero emission, it just shows you the head start, the good work that's happened here. And I'd also refer to the Just Commission report that was published a few weeks ago on sustainable transport that talked about that every pound delivered by the government through ScotZeb 2 it meant over £3 of investment from operators. So if the government has invested 140 odd million in supporting decarb, that's an investment of over 400 million from the commercial sector. Where we are now is I have concerns that the ending of ScotZeb will mean that there's areas of the country that haven't started or do not feel able to start their decarb journey. I'm thinking about rural areas and SMEs. Some of my colleagues here, represent sort of urban areas in the main, and maybe that's a different topic. But certainly, when I look at our smaller members within CPT membership and our coach operator members who have ambitions, they don't feel that they are yet able to really realise those on their own 2 feet. I chaired a decarbonisation task force ahead of ScotZeb 2 delivery, and I think probably we need to look at reconvening that with Transport Scotland to look at is there really the business case for the investment in decarb at the kind of timescale that the Scottish Government would like. I think it will happen, but if we want to accelerate that, for the larger operators at least, we need to have a real look at the data, and I'm not sure that where we are at the moment suggests that we're going to retain that lead that we've, it's not a competition, but retain the lead that we have over England currently.
So why was it that the smaller operators didn't feel that they could play into the ScotZeb scheme? You know, what was holding them back?
I think for a lot of those operators, they may be rural or semi-rural, operating marginal services. The cost is just so, as we talked about, the cost of vehicles at the moment, that it's just not feasible for them, or there's the additional aspect of charging infrastructure, which is something that has to be considered, whether they actually own their depot or what their depot looks like. Is it feasible for them to go zero emission in terms of putting the charging infrastructure? And also for rural services, you've got length of route. Are there vehicles available that are the type of vehicle that they would use on those routes and for the distance of those routes? So a number of factors that meant that whilst there was some small operators involved in ScotZeb 2's most recent round, if you look at the number of vehicles purchased there, a small handful, and there's many members out there in Scotland who've spoken to me about their ambitions that just feel that they can't do it by themselves.
Okay. And from an operator point of view, will you still continue to invest in net zero transport?
Yeah, I mean,
Duncan?
the investment, we're investing in both Aberdeen and Glasgow this year, and these vehicles are fully funded. They come at a premium, of course, so investing in both fully funded electrics, but also some repowers whereby a mid-life vehicle we're removing the diesel engine and replacing it with a battery. You know, I said at the start, when I was asked the question in regards to the cost of an electric vehicle, that premium still exists. We look at the total cost of ownership model, so the total cost over a projected 15 years, where you get the fuel savings, the cost of 2 batteries, etc., and then try and bring that down. And, you know, Paul referred to site infrastructure. We're using that in a business-to-business charging model, which obviously helps the circular economy, but also brings in some revenue to bring down that total cost of ownership. So I think in the absence of funding, yeah, we're absolutely committed. You know, as an operator, we've stated we're on a journey to net zero by 2035, and, you know, in the absence of funding, we just need to be a bit more creative than we maybe were previously in terms of how to get there.
Mm-hmm. And Duncan, you've obviously got 25 net zero hydrogen buses sitting idle in Aberdeen almost for a year now. is there any end in sight of when they may, and I know this is not a first bus issue, but is there any end in sight on that?
I'm not in a position to comment on a date in which they will be back on the road. No, I think the other comment I would add is, you know, EV, as history has probably shown in recent years, is further forward in terms of a net zero solution, or is at the forefront as a net zero solution, and we've seen that. But yeah, I mean, we continue to work with Aberdeen City Council and very much hope to see these vehicles on the street as soon as possible.
And have you taken a financial hit? Because obviously there was a lot of public money went into buying those vehicles, but is First Bus taking a financial hit as well, or is it not been the case?
So we've had to there's supporting, you know, there's obviously an agreement in place between ourselves and the City Council. There's some supporting clauses in the contract should fuel not be available, and that's helped us mitigate the additional cost of bringing in vehicles from elsewhere to continue serving.
So in your contract, if fuel was not available, there's penalty clauses come to yourself?
Yeah.
I presume you're not allowed to share what those figures are, or?
I'm not sure whether I am or I'm not. I don't have them on me. You know, I can, if I am allowed, I can certainly submit them in writing to you. Yeah.
Okay. And probably I should just declare that I was a member of the Aberdeen City Council at the start of this session. Convener.
I'm sure if you ask Aberdeen City Council, they'll tell you in the spirit of openness. Kevin, next questions on this to you.
Thank you very much, Convener, and I hope the hydrogen bus situation in Aberdeen can be resolved sooner rather than later. Obviously, folk like a bit of subsidy, but in terms of the investment in zero-emission buses, as Paul yourself rightly pointed out, it was a kick-start to get things going, and public finances are tight. I'm interested in what Duncan has had to say around about sharing facilities, charging infrastructure with other companies and making a bit of money. In terms of business plans and moving forward, does that shared facilities, does that ability to make a bit of profit out of others help in that decarbonisation journey? And if we could go to Duncan first, please.
Yeah, so that total cost of ownership model, the revenue we are trying to generate from some business-to-business charging, and we've been working closely with Police Scotland, DPD, other providers where they're able to obtain electric vehicles, but the infrastructure at their sites or just their type of ownership, where they're not following a fixed route, for instance, like a bus is, where they need multiple charging points through the day. Yeah, that revenue has helped us bring down that total cost of ownership to a neutral or much closer to a neutral point. You know, there's still a premium in the total cost of ownership compared to diesel equivalent, but it just makes the gap less than it otherwise would be the case.
Thank you. Sarah?
Lothian bid into the ScotZeb 2 fund, but we weren't successful. But we had hoped to work with partners within that fund to share the infrastructure that we've had to put in place at our central depot anyway. I think, yeah, I look at our fleet, 52% of our fleet could go electric tomorrow. The remainder, actually the range isn't there with vehicles in order to continue to operate without introducing huge efficiencies, extra vehicles, extra hours, all of that kind of thing. So actually opportunity charging, you know, strategic locations, the chance to look at where best, whether it's other people's facilities or whether it is opportunity charging that can be shared across mode. Yeah, I think all of that, absolutely. And I appreciate what you're saying about Kickstart, but I think support is needed in order to achieve net zero overall.
Okay, thank you. David, please.
Yes, just 2 quick points, I guess. Sarah's just touched on it there in terms of range. A big proportion of our services are express services, so St Andrews to Glasgow, St Andrews and Dundee to Edinburgh. And there are coaches out there that will have have substantial range, but really that's one big consideration for us from that move from diesel to electric is around the range of coaches, because it would be coaches that we would need to use on those type of services. On the point of allowing other businesses in to charge on our sites, we're not quite as far along in that journey at the moment. We do have electric vehicles in East Scotland and charging points, but that's a plan for the future, I guess, is to explore that.
So those longer distance routes where EV maybe is not an option, hydrogen would be an option, but there would have to be continuity of supply. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, I think that's, from others' experience, it's that infrastructure and the availability of fuel as well is the real challenge there.
Okay. And in terms of continuity of supply, we probably require regulatory change in terms of hydrogen transportation and storage. Do you have any comment on that? No.
Not myself, no.
Okay. Anyone on that? No. Okay. Thank you very much, Convener.
Okay. Now, 2 other members want to ask questions. I try and ask you to limit your questions, not to the whole panel, but to a couple of members of the panel. So, Michael, you first, followed by Mark.
Thanks, Convener. Good morning. Obviously, there's been good progress made in decarbonising some of the fleet in Scotland. But, of course, achieving net zero in an end is not an end in itself. It's also about helping to support the provision of a just transition to net zero. Do you as an industry see yourself as having a role in helping to make sure we deliver a just transition? And if so, how are you doing it?
So pick your 2 people, Michael.
Paul.
I mean, in reference to a just transition for bus users or for the companies involved, I'm not. I think what is difficult is delivering accelerated zero-emission vehicles at the same time as looking at other aspects of improving bus services, be that a reduction in fares and an increase in rural services, because you're burning 2 ends of the same candle. You're asking for more spend and whilst looking at cuts to revenue. So that's difficult. So there's an aspect of that question which I'm sure is not your full focus, but about the just transition for all operators, which is what I think we need to look at the timescale and support for that. And for bus passengers, I think it is important to consider. Whilst we make this transition to net zero, that it doesn't impact service availability and it doesn't impact fares. But I'm not sure that fully answers your question. But we have a role to play at working with Scottish Government partners to look at how we achieve that. And I think maybe just crosses over to maybe some of Mr Stewart's earlier question about Scottish Government's just done some work looking at mapping freight routes across Scotland, so they can look at charging that helps the freight sector, off motorway, off the motorway network or wherever it might be, and looking at, I think we should also look at mapping express bus and bus services, so that if there is public service charging, it fits not just rail but also freight but also bus, and that helps limit the cost and make it a fairer transition for those SMEs that might struggle.
Duncan?
I think I'd probably interpret your question slightly differently, if I may. For me, bus has a huge part to play, a much bigger role than people realise in delivering Scotland's net zero commitment. It's the most popular form of public transport. So when we talk about prioritising it as a mode, you know, we really need to do that much more in terms of that bus priority and that infrastructure. And it's not just about, you know, the vehicles being net zero. It's that journey towards net zero where we get more people on bus and truly apply the transport hierarchy.
Okay, so maybe I should maybe look at this a slightly different way with you then. A just transition is actually about creating economic and social benefit here in Scotland. What economic and social benefit do we get in Scotland when you procure electric buses from China? Duncan?
Well, first of all, you know, the vehicles may well be, you know, there may well be a Chinese partner involved, but there has been, there are still, you know, jobs created in terms of maintaining these vehicles. and jobs created in terms of employing bus drivers, etc.
Yeah, but the manufacturing sector, it doesn't create any capacity, does it?
No, not when it's procured directly.
No.
From them.
So if the industry sees itself as having a role in delivering a just transition, you're not doing it very well if you're procuring buses from China rather than using Scottish or UK manufacturers in order to expand their capacity in order to deliver a just transition to net zero. If we achieve net zero, but we don't have any jobs to show for it, that's not a just transition. Do you as an industry think you've got a role to play in making sure that you are generating economic value in the country through manufacturing of buses here in Scotland or in the UK by using some of the subsidy that you get from the Scottish Government and Scottish taxpayers to make sure that you deliver and you play a role in delivering a just transition?
I know Paul wants to come in just before you do. Yeah, yes, we, as an operator, we do, and you know that's why we've bought from Scottish and UK manufacturers so far, as well as from China. Thank you,
Paul.
I appreciate the point you're making, Mr. Matton, and Alexander Dennis, a Scottish manufacturer, one of CPT's members. I speak to them about this topic. I think you are right to point out the benefit of a strong manufacturing sector in Scotland. I think there's an economic and social value to any zero-emission bus, or to the bus sector in general, that we shouldn't underplay. And I would point to the KPMG work on the economic value of bus services that was published last year, which talked about the strong economic impact of the supply chain and the taxes, wages and investment of our staff, of the economic and social activities of bus passengers, and the economic impact of bus passengers interacting with local economies through commuter spend, shopping spend, benefits to the health sector. So there's a huge economic and social value in any bus, never mind any zero-emission bus, but I appreciate the point you're making specifically around the manufacturing sector.
Okay, thanks.
Mark, now can I ask you to ask one question to two people, not 5 questions to the same 2 people?
Well done, one person, actually. Yeah, one question, one person. I just wanted to come up very briefly with David. I mean, sensing that, you know, there's a bit of anxiety around EV coach range at the moment, but Ember are running, you know, services from Edinburgh to Fort William 4 times a day for the electric coaches, and the same up to Dundee as well. I mean, are we at a point now where actually EV coaches are there and they're available, and actually it's only a matter of time for all operators just to take them up?
Yeah, and I think in my initial response I did say that there are coaches out there. It's just a consideration around the cost of operating them. Obviously, I don't know sort of Ember schedules or their running boards and how they operate, but presumably there's charging available at one end, whereas the nature of our express services are there, you know, St Andrews to Edinburgh, drop off back out to St Andrews, so there's not necessarily that same availability of being able to opportunity charge as we touched upon earlier. But it's not to say that that's not something that we're not considering. It's something that we have to consider around cost and range and when we can charge, because the minute you start adding charging time into a bus schedule, you're potentially increasing the amount of resource that you're having to put into just to maintain the same timetable effectively. Mm-hmm. So it's not to say that, you know, I appreciate Ember's out there and they're using it, electric coaches, but it's just something that we'd have to consider how we do it, how we go about it from an operational perspective.
Okay. I'm just going to ask one very brief question at the end. Euro 6 diesel buses, are all your fleet Euro 6 diesel? Sarah?
All of our fleet are Euro 6 compliant by the end of 2022. We do now have some electric buses in the fleet as well.
But I mean the ones that Duncan?
Yeah, same answer.
No.
And David, you're on?
No, sorry.
In the rural areas, the ones that don't come into LEZs?
Yes.
Thank you. That's gone on for slightly longer than I anticipated, so thank you for giving evidence and for helping us this morning. I'm going to briefly suspend the meeting to allow a changeover of witnesses and ask committee members to be back in their seats for 11 o'clock, please. Thank you. Welcome back. And this is our second panel. Today we've got Joanne Maguire, the Managing Director of ScotRail Trains Limited, Liam Sumpter, the Managing Director of Network Rail Scotland, representing Scotland's railways, Graham Kelly, Commercial and Procurement Director for Caledonian Sleepers Limited, and Martin Bignell, the Scottish and North of England representative for the Rail Freight Group. Now we're going to move straight into questions. And I get the easy one just to warm you all up before the difficult ones in the committee have got for you. So my comment is that there hasn't been really a significant improvement in ScotRail or Caledonian Sleepers' performance since they were nationalised, despite the fact that ScotRail is running less services. And we're now at the stage where the PPM that caused Abellio and Serco to be replaced is not being met by the current operators. Can you just somebody explain that to me? Probably, what about Joanne? Do you want to head off on why you're doing worse than Abellio and you're running less trains?
Good morning, committee, and thank you for the question. So in terms of the last 3 years in public ownership, we've seen lots of opportunities to contribute to Scotland. And we know that 9 out of 10 of our trains do meet their punctuality target, but there's a lot more to be done. But we have also focused on our broader contribution. So the panel may have seen recently that we produced an independent report from Steer that said that we're actually contributing £4.1 billion to the Scottish economy through operating ScotRail trains. And we know that the landscape of the timetable that we're operating and our customer profile has changed significantly since the days of Abellio, which were pre-pandemic. So we know there's a lot more to be done on performance, but we are operating 9 out of 10 trains on time.
So, Joanne, a cynic could say that Abellio could have produced that report as well to get them off the punctuality, which isn't being met. And they were achieving a better figure than you are at the moment and running more trains, so more scope for it to go wrong. I'm not sure you've really answered the questions, except for there's more to do. I don't know. What about Graham? Do you want to add anything to that?
So, from a train performance point of view, Caledonian Sleeper just now is performing at its highest levels of performance since the franchise operated as its own train operating company. So we're running just now at 87.9% right time against a target of 80%. So we have a really strong operational performance, very strong occupancy figures.
So was that better than Serco? That
was better than the times through Serco, and we've seen that progress year on year from an operational performance point of view. So we're in a really strong place from operational performance.
Okay, so you're refuting it and Joanne's accepting it, is that right? My comment.
So yeah, what I would say is the figures are as they are. These are figures that are publicly available in terms of our operational performance. It's not to say that we don't also focus heavily on how can we make that better. We want to make sure that we deliver services to the highest degree level that we can to our guests. But certainly from where are we now as compared to where we have been in the past, we are at our strongest levels of operational performance.
I think you've certainly worked out how to do dynamic pricing to an exceptional level, which means that the costs for travelling on a sleeper at short notice are very high. But anyway, we'll leave that and maybe come back to it. Bob, you've got the next question.
Yeah, so just kind of a follow-up so we can have a debate about the performance figures and where they are historically. Any further comments, John, you want to give on that would be very helpful. But what I really want to know is, for performance, where there are cancellations, where there are delays, what's actually causing that? So what are the main reasons for the cancellations? And we've been through, it's not our first rodeo, Convener, we keep getting bounced between what is a kind of staffing issue or a timetabling issue, what is an engineering issue, and what sits with Network Rail and what sits with ScotRail. And we try to scrutinise, we hear Scotland's Railways. What we want to hear is who's responsible for the delays and cancellations and who's responsible for fixing it. So what's causing delays and cancellations and what are we doing to fix it? So Joanne, can I bring you back in?
Of course. Thanks, Bob. So with regards to the Scottish Train Performance Measure, it's fair to say that it's a shared target between Network Rail in Scotland and ScotRail, and I'm sure Liam might want to comment. Following up on the performance review, from between December and March, so our most recent few periods, they were actually better than the last year, comparably. With regards to what is the challenges, there are two significant challenges for ScotRail as regards performance, and that is our fleet and our train crew, and what we're doing to fix it. So with regards fleet, we've been delighted to get the permission to be...
Joanne, can I, and I hate doing this, it's not my style of questioning, but before we identify what we're doing to fix it, can we quantify the extent of the challenge? So for every cancellation there is in Scotland's railways, what percentage of those sits with ScotRail? So it's not about a points failure or engineering works, it's the train driver hasn't turned up, or there's some other issue with ScotRail as an organisation, that public body that we are trying to scrutinise. So just to get the extent, I'm not trying to create an issue that's not there, but like for every 100 rail cancellations, how many of them sit directly with ScotRail's responsibility? And how's that varied over time?
Yep. So in terms of those numbers, we can come back to the committee on exactly what the numbers are, but the majority of the cancellations from ScotRail last year, or the performance failures, were in relation to train crew shortages and fleet.
Okay. So I'll bring Liam in later, but so we don't know the extent of the issue with ScotRail, but you're going to tell me how you're going to fix it anyway. I'm not trying to be. I'm genuinely not trying to be sarcastic. I'm just trying to understand what the situation is. So maybe continue with the line of your answer that I interrupted you. So my apologies.
No,
for that.
not at all. So, with regards to train crew and fleet, so on train crew, we are currently recruiting and training 160 drivers a year, which is more than any other train operator in the UK. And part of that was playing catch-up when there were lost years due to the pandemic and not being able to run the driver training programme, and the significant volume of retirements that we've seen from our driver population in year one of public ownership. And on fleet, there are two key elements. There's the longer-term plan, where we've been really pleased to get government backing to begin the process to replace our intercity fleet. But we're also investing £7.5 million in upgrading our fleets to improve performance. For example, wheel slippage in autumn, where we traditionally see poor performance. So we're investing in the fleets also.
Okay, so it'd be nice to have some numbers around that. But
we can certainly send the committee the numbers.
Liam, can you assist us in relation to, because in the past, and my apologies if it's in a briefing paper, convener, and I've missed it for this morning's session, but in the past we've had through SPICE, we've had data in relation to, for it, you know, like 60% of trains cancelled, it's because of an engineering issue. If we sit with Network Rail, 40% is because of what, and I don't have that in front of me this morning, so my apologies that I've not got that. Mr Sumpter, can you assist me?
I hope I can, yes. Good morning, committee. So I do have some of the data that Joe's referring to. If we talk about train delays, from the last year, that's the year ending the 31st of March, 46% of all train delays are due to infrastructure, so due to Network Rail, and 49% due to train operations, of which 44% ScotRail related and 5% are other operators that then cause delay to ScotRail. So 46 Network Rail, 49 train operators. In terms of cancellations, the total number of the percentage of cancellations for last year was 2.2%. So 2.2% of all ScotRail trains cancelled throughout the course of the year. That is an order of magnitude better than any other train operator in the country. So if I look south of the border, the average is around 4.5% of trains, so it's considerably better. Of that 2.2%, I think I'm right in saying 0.9% is due to Network Rail, 1.3% due to ScotRail. And obviously we have some real challenges at the start of the year with train crew that probably enhance that score much larger than it would ordinarily be.
Okay. So that's very helpful. What would be helpful the committee would have would be how that has changed over time. So we can see the movement in that performance. If you can add anything else just now, that would be welcome. If not, I won't go back in again.
Sure, I can tell you that ebbs and flows. So if you look at the story of Scotland's railway over the last 10 to 15 years, broadly speaking, when we talk about the Scottish Train Performance Measure, the result has been around 90% for that time period. Sometimes it's been as low as 87.4, sometimes it's gone up to 91, a little bit higher during the COVID years, but broadly speaking, we've been operating at 80 and 90% railway for that time frame. There have been real ebbs and flows depending on what's happened in any given year between the infrastructure and between the train operator. So what we particularly see on the infrastructure side of things, if we have a year where we get really, really bad weather, lots of named storms, then the delays associated with Network Rail will likely be a little bit higher that year, and the train operators will be a little bit lower. Where we have years where there are industrial relations disputes on the train operator side, that will usually cause a spike in the train operator related delays. So they do ebb and flow. If you look over the last, say, the time since COVID, we've seen consistent levels of improvement on the categories that we feel we can have a really direct influence over, particularly those associated with pure infrastructure, non-track assets, the points failures I think you referenced earlier. We have seen improvement in them, but train delays associated with weather or external incidents, trespass, fatalities, fires, those are very spiky and they're dependent on what happens in any given year.
Okay, I suppose finally, just to check then, I think the data has been very helpful in scrolling it down and look back at the official report also. The 46% of delays that's been related to an engineering or Network Rail matter, what improvement plan does Network Rail have in place? Obviously there's extremist weather which can't be taken account for. It's about how quickly you get the network back up and running. There's things we're looking at there, but in terms of like proactively trying to reduce the amount of delays from a Network Rail point of view, how does your improvement plan seek to tackle that?
So if I refer to the 46% of delays that Network Rail caused last year, that's attributed to Network Rail, and it covers weather and it covers these external events as well as the infrastructure things and just generally how we manage the network. That's actually improvement year on year, so it's a 7% improvement from the previous year, 7% better than our target. So that shows that we are making some headway in those regards, I think. And we have a plan, but not just our plan, we have a joint plan. So we've been working with Jo and her team to develop a genuinely joint plan. It's a benefit of how we work together in an alliance, that we've got this really strong knowledge and interest in each other's deliverables. So we've got a joint plan to improve, and that will take us through the next few years. As part of that joint plan, there's a lot of investment coming from Scottish Government into the infrastructure side of things. So we've got a plan over the course of the 5-year funding period, of which we've just finished the first year, of over £4 billion worth of total investment, with £2 billion of that on renewal. So we're renewing infrastructure generally when we say that. Of that £2 billion, I think the really interesting stuff is we've put £400 million of it towards improving our resilience in the face of climate change. So we know that delays associated with weather have been really spiky and they cause a lot of disruption. Around a fifth of all of the Network Rail delay, sometimes more, is due to weather. So £400 million has been dedicated to making our infrastructure more resilient in weather over the course of this 5-year period. We do things like we improve drainage sites, so we reduce the number of drainage sites. And to give you a statistic there, a little over 9 years ago, we had 260 sites across the railway that were prone to flooding in high levels of precipitation. We've now, in the course of those last 9 or 10 years, got that down to just under 50 sites. So we do that, that's what that £400 million worth of investment goes towards, is reducing flooding sites. It's reducing the possibility of earthworks sliding onto the railway. It's making our railway more resilient, removing trees so they don't fall down during storms and that sort of thing onto the overhead wires, as well as the whole pantheon of activity that we've got to try and improve train performance across every single one of our categories. And as I said, that is a joint plan that we work together with ScotRail, and together we can move performance forward.
Okay, thank you, Convener.
Okay, I think the Deputy Convener has got some questions here.
Thanks, Convener. Good morning. Joanne, your PPM target is 92.5%. What did you achieve in 2024-25?
So in 24-25, overall in Scotland, we were at 89.7%. 89.
How does that compare to what you've achieved, or what's been achieved over the course of the last 5 years?
So when we look at the 89.7%, if we discount the pandemic years, because we know traditionally that running less trains makes it easier to operate the railway, the year before we were 0.2% above that, and the year before we were 89.4%, so consistently just below 90%, within a 1% tolerance. The work that we're doing jointly is to get us to the target of 92.5%, and there is a 5-year plan to get us to 92.5%. Relative to the rest of the UK, ScotRail and Scotland Railway does perform well.
Yeah. When did the 5-year plan start?
So it started last, so it's set against the 5-year control period for Network Rail,
Okay.
so it began last year.
Okay. So what do you need to happen to get that 3% this year?
Yeah. So in real terms for ScotRail, the plan is that we will not get to 92.5 this year, but we will make a marked improvement on the year before. With regards to ScotRail, there's already been a significant step forward in that we've secured our 2-year pay deal. So we are looking forward to a summer that will be free from pay-related industrial action and will remove the need for a temporary timetable, giving greater certainty for our customers and opportunities to drive revenue and performance. So we've already made a significant step forward on that. And from this autumn, we will start to see the incremental increase in our driver numbers coming through, which is starting to pay dividends against the investment in the 160 per year that we've been bringing on. With regards to our fleet, as I mentioned, we've secured £7.5 million of improvements, and we play a balancing act as to how many trains we can withdraw at any time to do improvement works on against maintenance, the trains that are withdrawn for maintenance, and we will start to see the output of some of that towards the end of this calendar year.
Okay.
So unfortunately, it's not quick wins, but we know that we're on the improvement journey, and backing to get the 2-year pay deal has been significant in that.
Okay, a couple of quick questions then. So you don't expect to reach your PPM this year, but you expect a marked improvement on where you were last year. What's a marked improvement?
So our target for this year is to be, for ScotRail in real terms, it would take us to a 17% year-on-year improvement. And as I say, we have a level of confidence, especially as regards our train crew, due to the fact that we have secured the pay deal. But the target for the year is 90.73 overall, so around a 1% increase.
Okay, and my final question is that it's a 5-year plan. At which year in the 5-year plan do you expect to reach PPM?
So we are currently pulling together an improvement plan as regards that, but for me, the earliest year we will hit that target would be year 4 of the 5-year control period.
Sorry, I'm a wee bit confused here. What do you mean improvement plan? I thought you had a plan.
So we do have a plan for 5 years, but we review it every year based on our performance, and we look to improve that further.
So you supplement that with an improvement
Yes.
plan? Okay. And right now, your earliest prediction is year 4
Yes.
of the 5-year plan for achieving PPM?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Just to clarify, so I haven't got any of the dates wrong, year 4 of the 5-year plan is 2028, is that right?
Yeah, so this
I'm
is the
glad
start
you're
of
thinking about it as well, because you've got me thinking.
Well, we've just started
This is
year
year
2.
two.
We've just started year 2, so year 4 is, it's beginning of 28, isn't it?
Yeah.
Beginning of 28,
Yes, so
end of
March.
27, beginning of 28.
Yes.
So in the winter of 27,
Yes.
Yes.
if that, as the government always likes, yes, weather timetables. Sarah, you've got a question later, but I think it meshes into this. So I'm going to bring you in at this stage, if I may, please.
Yeah, much appreciate that, Convener. It's about the infrastructure and keeping it going. And I think there was the comment earlier about the £400 million being invested to make the infrastructure climate reliant and resilient. I actually met a train driver at the weekend, and he was talking about when you actually do the repairs and maintenance on the lines and the areas beside the lines, it can actually have landslips. You know, when you remove trees, it removes the resilience of the land beside the railway. So that was something I wanted to flag. But the other bit was the fact that the rail unions have said that there's a lack of investment in that ongoing infrastructure maintenance, and that's meaning that staff are actually being laid off at major subcontractors. So there seems like a disconnect between the huge amount of money you're putting in to make the network reliant, but also that staff are losing their jobs. So can you talk about how you're actually keeping that staff set of skills and knowledge so that we make sure that the long-term future and safety of the rail infrastructure is not going to be compromised because of short-term savings? Two things feel at odds with each other.
Yeah, I can talk about that. Maybe I'll touch on the very first thing you mentioned first. It is absolutely the case that as you remove trees, that has an impact on the ecology of the earthwork in which the tree was, because it's not there to suck up water and all that sort of stuff. But we have some of the best engineers, I think, in UK Rail in Scotland, because we're so used to dealing with these challenges that we take account of that when we remove trees. We have a full ecological survey every time we remove any trees, and most of the time it is the right thing to do. There are certain types of embankment where that is a bigger risk. I think it's particularly the case in Kent, south of London, where they've got lots of clay embankments, where that has a bigger impact. Here we're really clear on when it's appropriate to remove trees or not. Turning to the second issue, I don't think I quite recognise the characterisation that you've been given from elsewhere. The funding for Network Rail over this control period is in line with the funding of the previous control period. That is, it's basically the same. What we have done is we've shifted some of the emphasis within that, as I said earlier, to invest more in climate change resilience than we had done previously. So, for example, we've reduced the amount of track renewals we've done, and we're doing more targeted refurbishment of specific components rather than replacing the whole system. And that enables us to spend more money on the climate change resilience. In terms of maintenance, we went through a programme around 2 years ago called Modernising Maintenance. And in Modernising Maintenance, we reduced the overall cost of maintenance in Scotland by around £12 million per annum through that programme. And what that meant was we stopped doing some of the maintenance activity that our expert engineers told us didn't add value, and instead concentrated on the activity that does have value. Since then, the reliability of our infrastructure has actually improved. So we improved by 9% last year in terms of the number of failures caused by the infrastructure, which has outperformed our best expectations. The amount of work that exists within our engineering backlog, that is to say the work which is done on time, we lead the whole country in that. Around about 2%, 2.7% I think of our work is in engineering backlog, and there will always be work in engineering backlog because of other priorities that emerge on the day. That is a really good position to be in. Our safety record has been really strong in the last year as well since we implemented these changes, so modernising maintenance by all measurables has actually been a success thus far, but we continue to review whether it's right to undertake it or not, and whether it's right to do anything different and tweak it. But my point is that the level of investment going into the infrastructure is at least on par with the previous 5-year period, and the results are demonstrating improvements in that space. And we haven't made anybody compulsorily redundant within Network Rail in that time frame. We have an agreement with our trade unions that we won't do that, and we haven't needed to do that.
The issue wasn't about Network Rail making staff redundant, it was about subcontractors?
Yeah, I don't recognise where that's from. It's not what I'm hearing from our supply chain colleagues. I think there are some very specific examples where there was a type of activity called high output, so that was really heavy track renewals that was taking place. We're not doing as much of that nationally because we've found more efficient ways to do it locally. So whereas we've increased the amount of work that we've done locally to compensate for the loss of that big high output programme, and what we've worked with some of the organisations that used to provide the workforce that did that to try and accommodate them within Network Rail, because if we can retain their skills, then we'll do that. The reality is the vast majority of them don't live in Scotland, so we've only been able to do that with, I think it's actually only one person we've been able to take who's wanted to join us. More of them live south of the border because that was a national programme that moved around the country.
Right, okay, that's good. I'll feed that back. And the issue about chopping trees down, it wasn't about the principle of that, because actually they get too big. It was about the resilience of the infrastructure afterwards to make sure it's not vulnerable to extreme weather. And that I must just be unlucky, because I have actually had several train journeys that have been cancelled, and it was because of either landslips or electricity just not being available for the train at the time. So it's definitely on my issue as a resilience issue that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, so I think So I was referring to the stability of the embankment once you've removed the tree, which is part of that resilience issue. So I'm saying removing trees does not, in Scotland, does not cause additional landslips. We do have landslips anyway, because some of our railways set against very steep parts of Scotland, and we're investing very heavily in earthwork resilience. One of the things you may have noticed, if you're travelling through an area with lots of earthworks, lots of embankments, is usually yellow, sometimes white, yellow or white poles sticking in the earthwork. And that's stuff that we've implemented in the last 5 years, and they're called they're tilt monitors. So each one of those tests when the resilience effectively of the earthwork. So when there's a movement of the earthwork, then alarm goes into our control centre, and we can send somebody out to go and look at it to see if there's actually been an embankment slippage, and they can hopefully repair it before it becomes a big one, or if it's not, then we might stop the trains in order to carry out a repair. So we've installed hundreds of these tilt meters across the country now, so we get an early warning sign if any of our earthworks do start to fall. That generally only happens during extreme weather events, during high levels of precipitation. Convective rainfall events in general are usually the causes of that. So we know it's going to happen, we monitor them, and we take the appropriate action when it does.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much, Sarah. The next questions come from Mark.
Joanne, can I come back to you and ask you about the ticket office opening hours changes? And can I ask you what assurances ScotRail can give that the changes will not result in fewer staff being available at stations or stations effectively being unstaffed for longer periods?
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Mark. With regards to the review that we carried out of our ticket office opening hours, we took into account many more factors than we were required to. But one of the driving reasons was the fundamental shift in how people buy tickets from us. So we sell less than 15% of our tickets through our ticket offices prior to making these changes, and over half of our tickets are in fact sold online at this current time. So we carried out consultation internally and externally, and we looked at how many tickets were being sold. Some key headlines of the change programme were that there have been no redundancies associated with the changes, and no ticket offices have closed. We've looked at amending opening hours. Staff have retained their own terms and conditions. What we have is...
Sorry, Joanne, I don't mean to interrupt, but can I just go back to the actual very specific question, which is about, and this does come back to the concerns that the unions have, will it result in fewer staff being available at stations or stations being unstaffed for longer periods? This is an issue that unions and disability groups and others are concerned about. It's about the staffing at stations. So I'm well aware of some of the reasons and business model changes around ticket sales, but on that point, it would be great if you could address that.
So prior to the change, over half of our stations were unstaffed to begin with. Over half of the stations that we operate. We have not reduced anyone's working hours, so we've maintained the number of staff hours that we have. What we have done is we have brought staff out from behind the glass and onto the platform or to other stations where there was a need for assistance. With regards to disability representative groups and our trade unions, we've worked closely with them through this process. And whilst we might have staff moving around different stations, there will still be the same number of staff hours across our stations every day. Staff are being deployed where there is need for those staff to be, so where we are selling tickets. Where we have an unstaffed station that might have been unstaffed prior to these changes, or the hours may have reduced, we have a help point on every platform. And when you press that help point, you're connected to an employee of ScotRail who is either in our CCTV centre at Dunfermline or in Paisley. They can identify you on the platform and they will ensure you get whatever assistance you need.
Okay, so there are effectively then some staff that are currently working at fully staffed stations will be working at unstaffed stations. They'll be moving
so staff
to
will
staff
move around,
currently unstaffed stations.
And we've said that we will consistently keep it under review, and we're involving the trade unions in those reviews.
Okay. What do you think the underlying concern is from trade union groups, and we've heard evidence that there are concerns that particularly female staff working alone at a station, could be the case going forward. There's obviously a background concern around antisocial behaviour, and if you have a more dispersed workforce working at stations, how do you address that? How do you address some of the concerns that have come from disability access groups that an automated kind of help point doesn't suit the needs of everybody? It's difficult to access or even find if you have a disability such as sight loss and other issues. So I just, it feels that this is an unresolved issue, and I've heard this kind of, I've heard the business case from you on several occasions in public and private meetings we've had as well, but you still have these unresolved issues and concerns. So how do you take those on? I mean, how do you resolve those?
Yeah. So for sure. So when we embarked on this under public ownership, there were some really unfortunate comparisons to work that had been planned south of the border, and that related to closing ticket offices. We have worked really hard to convince our work with our trade unions and with stakeholder representatives to convince them that this is not a case of closing ticket offices. This is a case of deploying staff to where the need is greatest. We have invested in our staff numbers over the last 3 years, and we've put a lot of measures in place to combat antisocial behaviour and concerns around safety. So we commenced our travel safe team as a pilot in the West, and we've just launched a team in the East as of January this year, putting more staff onto the network to work with passengers and ensure it's safe. We have our revenue protection teams to drive down ticketless travel, because we know that ticketless travel can be a source of antisocial behaviour. We have tripled our number of body-worn cameras, because again there is university research that shows that body cameras can prevent antisocial behaviour, so we've tripled the number of those available to staff. There's now over 1,000. And we've also double-staffed late-night trains in antisocial behaviour hotspots, because statistically the staff who are on the receiving end of most antisocial behaviour are in fact our on-train staff. We absolutely remain committed that one assault on a member of staff or a passenger is one too many. I'm sure I don't need to rehearse the societal problems that we're grappling with regards to antisocial behaviour. But with the backing of government, we have put a significant number of measures in place, including closing our vacancy gap and investing in staff numbers, not reducing them. Okay,
but if you worked at a station, you're a lone female worker working at a station.
Yeah.
Do you personally feel convinced that the working environment that's been established, and with all the measures that you just outlined, would give you confidence to be in that environment?
So when we were going through the change process, we've had one-to-ones with every member of staff and carried out risk assessments with them. Our staff book on and book off every day, so we know when they arrive for work and we know when they finish their shift, and they keep in constant contact with us. We have one of the most extensive CCTV networks in the UK also. So if there are any individual staff, we will work with them, but we are investing significantly and working very closely with our trade unions, who we have a good relationship with, to do everything we can to ensure our staff are safe at work.
Okay, so you would feel comfortable working at a station as a lone worker
with all of the measures we currently have in place, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Jan, sorry, I was just thinking about the figures you gave me. I think you said over 50% of people buy their tickets online.
Yes.
And 15% buy their tickets on from the ticket office, which would suggest that somewhere around 35% buy their tickets on the train. Is that what you're suggesting? I'm not sure how else you get your ticket. Explain to me.
So yeah, we have, I think it's between 10 and 15% of sales we put through our ticket Railways love acronyms, we call them a TVM, so our ticket machines at stations.
Okay.
So whether it's an unstaffed or a staffed station, people will buy them there, and they will also buy them through third parties, for example, Trainline.
Okay, so about 15% bought online. Yep. And is that increasing or decreasing?
The use of TVMs has not significantly increased. It's
no.
Online. Online is increasing.
The person selling the ticket on the train.
That's broadly stayed the same.
Okay.
So,
Okay,
and we are committed to keeping a person on it, a second person on every train.
So just a quick supplementary on that. If there is an unmanned ticket office,
Yeah.
that station will have a ticket vending machine. I assume that's what TVM stands for.
Not every unstaffed station has one on the platform, but you will always be able to buy a ticket from the person on the train.
Okay, and there's no penalty for doing that?
No.
No increase. Okay, thank you. Sorry, just so that clears up. I love figures, and Liam's given me a whole lot of percentages, which I'm going to digest later. Kevin, the next question is from you.
Thank you, Convener. We've already touched upon disability access from Mark's questioning. And, you know, hats off to your staff. They do a good service, particularly conductors when folk don't appear at platforms. How do you ensure that there is availability and provision for passenger assistance when it's required? And how can you do a little bit better in ensuring that those folks are timious? Because one of the things which I've seen, I'm sure others have as well, is where a disabled passenger gets a little bit anxious because they're not being boarded quickly enough as they see it.
Yeah. So in terms of what we do, and we can always improve on everything that we do to begin with. So we have worked really hard to make our network as accessible as possible, and Liam might want to comment on the network because there's a lot of good work being done by Network Rail Scotland in terms of improving accessibility of what is essentially a Victorian infrastructure. If you think about our step gap, for example, between the train and the platform.
With some specific questions soon.
As regards accessibility from a ScotRail perspective, so we do have our station staff, but we also do have a second person on every train who can help a passenger on or off the train when they arrive. Passengers can pre-book assistance, or they can turn up and go, either using the help point or when the train arrives they can get assistance. So there's always more we can do, and we work hard with our stakeholder groups to take constant feedback. But we are proud of the work that we already do, and as I say, the commitment to the second person on the train is significant in that.
I think that is significant, and there's often I've seen where there is a hospitality steward on the train, actually going and helping as well. So, as I said earlier, hats off to your staff, but I think there is room for improvement there. And I do think, particularly folk who are not used to travelling, if they're not boarded quickly or it's quite near the time for departure, they do become a little bit anxious about these things. I want to move on to the infrastructure aspect, which you already mentioned, Joanne, but probably my questions here are for Liam, because we've heard quite a number of folks call for level boarding. We know, as Joanne has said, that we have Victorian infrastructure. In the journeys that I take, you hear the announcements. Dundee, for example, watch out because there's a large step to the platform. We also have stations, not on routes that I normally take, but the likes of Dunkeld and Burnham Station, which I understand is due to be upgraded in terms of its platforms. What can be done swiftly to resolve some of these problems? And has Network Rail done any analysis, any stock take, and how much it would actually cost to bring our stations up to modern standards for level boarding?
Okay, thank you very much for the question. This is an issue that is really important to us. You know, we want to make sure that Scotland's railway is open to everybody, and the reality is that there are some real challenges, as you referenced earlier. Some of our infrastructure platforms, they are Victorian infrastructure. There are very large gaps between train and platform, whether that be a height or even distance from the face of the platform outwards. Lots of our stations are inaccessible in the context of it's difficult to get from one platform to the other, and those sorts of things as well. So with that in mind, we have a programme, our Accessibility for All programme, which aims to improve the availability of accessible stations across Scotland. That programme is one of the very few items that is actually reserved to UK government from a funding perspective. So in the last 5 years, up to a year ago, so from 6 years ago to 1 year ago, we invested £23.2 million in improving accessibility at a series of stations, including Uddingston, Dumfries and Port Glasgow, and there are a few others, to make those stations fully accessible to passengers. We've now embarked upon the next control period of funding, and we are working with the Department for Transport on a new series of stations that we can put through that programme. We're looking at Dumbarton Central, Inverurie, to name a couple that I know that we're, Falkirk Grahamstown, that's another one that we're focusing on. But that, as I say, that's funded by UK government through the Department for Transport. And there's a programme that covers the whole of Great Britain's railways for that. In Scotland, we have been able to deliver those projects with our highly skilled project team and our supply chain for a price that is reasonable, but that is not always the case. Elsewhere, there are some really, really expensive schemes, and the UK government has an overall pot for that. And that pot has come under strain and stress over the last few years, I think it's fair to say. So we're in a position now where I think, broadly speaking, a third of the stations in Scotland are fully accessible. Around over half of stations are accessible to an extent, and we're trying to push that up. But the reality is that it's going to take quite a long time. The amount of money involved in some of these schemes is very, very significant. That can depend on the state of the infrastructure as it is, just how big the gap is, how much additional work is going to take place. Or it can be to do with things like, well, what's the cost, for example, or what's the proximity with landowners, what's the proximity with residents nearby. If we need to build a accessible footbridge over the railway, that can have a huge impact on the cost. And of course, things like platforms and accessible footbridges, they come at a cost because of materials, and the cost of concrete is going up with global pressures on construction and stuff like that. So all of those things have a contributory impact that pushes the cost of these projects up. But we are working through with our own team, with the Transport Scotland, on determining what the right priorities are, and with the Department for Transport as a funder. We're also doing other things at stations to improve accessibility.
So can I, before we move on to that,
yes, of course,
because I want to see what we actually know at this moment, and get an estimate of what the current financial cost would be of dealing with the 2/3 of stations that are not fully accessible. Do you have a register? Do you have at this moment an estimate of how much it would cost at today's prices to make all of these stations accessible?
So I don't think I can give you that answer, but what I can tell you is we spent £23.2 million in the last 5 years to cover 6 or 7 stations. So if we were to scale that up, you would be talking about hundreds of millions of pounds.
In terms of the UK budget for this, you said that has been restricted. Yeah. Has that gone up or down in the current control period?
I don't know whether it's gone up or down. I think it might be subject to what comes out of the spending review to determine what that might be. So the UK government spending review that's ongoing. I think the scale of the budget for the last 5 years was something like £260 million for the whole of Great Britain, and we spent 23.2 of that. My expectation is that that's broadly in line for this 5-year period, but I would probably need to take that away and confirm to you what that is.
So in terms of level boarding then, which was the original question, which has been asked for by many, many stakeholders, that's not really going to likely become a reality until many of these stations are fixed. Is that fair to say?
I think that is fair to say, yes. There's some real engineering challenges. We're working through them, tackling stations that are the busiest stations as a priority. We agree those priorities with Transport Scotland and with our colleagues at ScotRail, and we work through them as fast as the funding can flow.
So basically, ourselves, the stakeholders, yourselves, are going to have to lobby the Treasury quite hard to ensure that this fund, which they still hold the purse strings on, is enhanced to make level boarding a reality across Scotland. Would that be fair?
I think it's fair to say that the more that the Scottish rail industry can do to recommend to UK government the benefits of this scheme, the better.
Thank you. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much, Kevin. I have just got a quick question on integrated multimodal ticketing, something that I seem to remember looking at the Transport Act in 2019. I can't remember. I think it was then. Was it? 2019. It was. My memory hasn't gone completely wrong. And Stuart Stevenson used to bring my attention to it on every possible occasion. How are we working towards that, Joanne? Are we going to do that? I assume with the 50-something% online, you probably should be on some way towards achieving that, are you?
So there has been work led in the past 12 to 18 months by Transport Scotland, bringing all of the transport providers together to look at the art of the possible on multimodal ticketing. And we already have some areas where we do good work. So, for example, the rail and sail tickets between ScotRail and CalMac, for example. But in terms of, we don't have a timescale in terms of multimodal ticketing.
So, can I buy a train ticket to catch a ferry? We'll get into whether the train meets the ferry at a different stage, I guess. But if I go on your line, if I go on to ScotRail, can I buy a ticket which gets me onto another nationalised industry, CalMac's thing?
Yes, it's called a rail and sail ticket, yeah.
Yeah, and CalMac doing that for you as well, back?
So we sell their products as it currently stands, and we do work with them to join the timetables up.
I'm not sure if I understood. So CalMac sell your product as well, do they?
I don't believe they do, but we sell theirs as called a rail and sail ticket.
I'm sure you'll twist their arms as a result of this to make sure that that happens. But it needs to go beyond just that, doesn't it? If we're going to get people to use public transport, you would accept that?
Yes, we know that in a lot of areas of Scotland you will need more than one mode of transport to get to your end destination. Yeah. Yeah. So a bus, a train, a ferry. There are some bus companies that we have great partnerships with. There are others that there's more work to be done on. Okay. And that's being done. Just yes. It is. So, for example, we've just done some really positive work in the Borders recently in terms of aligning our timetables with the bus providers down there. We know there are connectivity challenges in that area of Scotland. Okay. Sarah, I think you've got the next question.
And it really follows on very well because it's not just the ticketing, it's also thinking about coordinating timetables, particularly with access to rail services. The last session we spent a lot of time talking about how delayed and slow bus services are. Trains a lot faster, but how do you access stations? And could there be more done in terms of coordination that would work right across the rail and the bus sector to up the number of people using railways in Scotland?
Yeah, so we have a strategy that, believe it or not, didn't exist a few years ago called A Railway for All. And that looks at how people start their journey, so how they travel to station right through to the end of their journey. And we are, as I said, we are working with bus partners and ferry partners to improve connectivity, sometimes easier when there are other publicly owned organisations that we can work more easily and more closely with. But we know there's a lot more to be done in terms of aligning timetables. And where there may be delays on either side, making sure that that connectivity does flow through.
So how big a priority actually is it? Because you said discussions are ongoing, but in terms of the passengers, you're sending trains, you could potentially fill those trains up more and actually generate more income for the sector.
Yeah, so as I said, so it is a significant priority for us. So as I mentioned, we have just had some recent successes in Borders, and I will give credit to the community groups down there who keep us very focused on improving connectivity in the Borders. So we are looking at other areas of Scotland where we know we need to line up better.
Okay, I think it'd be good to get feedback on numbers and what difference that could make actually going forward, particularly given its bus ferry services. I can see why it's complicated, but it would be a big benefit to everybody.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much, Sarah. Douglas, I think you've got some questions.
Yes, Convener. Joanne, on Saturday afternoon, I was on the train from Aberdeen to Dundee, and it was like a party train. I think everyone was drinking, except me. And I'm not blaming the staff in any way on this, but the alcohol ban it doesn't seem to be workable, doesn't seem to be enforceable. Do you think it should be removed?
So the alcohol ban is a matter for Scottish Government to make a decision on, and we know that it's not a straightforward decision to be made. The position of ScotRail has always been that we can't, in fact, enforce the ban because it's not a matter of law. Our staff cannot enforce it. So our position is that if staff are on train, they cannot intervene and ask people not to drink. We are aware there is no statistical link in terms of antisocial behaviour in the consumption of alcohol on the train, but it does remain a policy matter for Scottish Government as to whether or not the ban remains in place.
But as you say, it's not enforceable at all. I'm just trying to understand what the point of it is, apart from maybe even taking revenue away from ScotRail, who, in terms of catering service, could actually be making money from it instead.
Yeah. So, as I said, we understand that this is not a simple decision around alcohol and trains. There is a broader challenge around alcohol and society across Scotland. We do not enforce the ban. You're quite right. We do not retail it, and we are looking to improve and build on our catering offer on train over coming months. It's a challenge that remains, but a decision for government.
So what discussions has there been with Scottish Government to get through that? It's not being, because obviously it's not being enforced by yourselves. You never, very rarely see somebody from British Transport Police on a train. So what discussions has had with Scottish Government to say that this isn't really working in any way, especially when you have the figures to show that in terms of antisocial behaviour, it doesn't really play into that at all?
Yeah. So, as we said, that statistically, there is no link between antisocial behaviour and the consumption of alcohol on the train. We are fortunate in that we have a hugely supportive Cabinet Secretary who's been hugely supportive of rail as part of her very broad transport portfolio. And we have had conversations through Transport Scotland about how we are ensuring that the environment in which we operate is as safe as possible in order to inform decision around the ban. But as I say, ultimately it is a decision for government.
Because we heard from the trade unions last week, they don't support this ban because they actually, feel for that in terms of their members, it probably adds a bit of maybe could be sort of potential conflict there. Yeah. And I'm just trying to work out the timetable for this being under review. So, from your discussions with the Scottish Government, when is there going to be a decision made? Do you have any idea?
So, we are not aware of what a timescale would be. As I said, we work through Transport Scotland, who would be sharing information with government. In terms of the trade union concerns, we absolutely support our staff, and that's why we don't ask them to enforce the ban, because we know that there is no legal reason for it.
Okay, and in terms of Caledonian Sleeper, there's no alcohol ban. Is there any issues with alcohol on Caledonian Sleeper, Graham?
No, so I think it's important to note it's two very different services, and actually the vast majority of alcohol that's consumed in Caledonian Sleeper is through the sale of alcohol. So we control that sale. Our staff are trained in the control of the sale of alcohol, and if we do believe there are any guests on our services who are getting to the point of consuming too much alcohol, then we would refrain from serving any further alcohol in that circumstance. Okay,
thank you. Joanne, you obviously, in terms of antisocial behaviour, you have the Travel Safe team. Do you have any evidence that team is making any difference, and you're going to roll that out further across the network?
Yeah, so I mean, we do a lot in terms of antisocial behaviour and work both ScotRail, but specifically the Travel Safe team, work very closely with the Transport Police also. So we have just increased the number of Travel Safe officers we have as of January, and we have a team who are now book on at Haymarket, and they are starting to cover the east of the country. So we are expanding the team, and we are also going to consider further north in terms of scope of the Travel Safe team.
And how big is that team just now?
So just now we've got about 35 Travel Safe officers in totality.
But once again, they wouldn't try and enforce the alcohol ban at all. That's not their.
So we don't enforce the alcohol ban because, as I say, there's no legal backing for us to enforce the ban.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Convener.
Just before we leave that, it was suggested, I think, unless I misheard it last week, that rather than a blanket ban, it might be more appropriate to have a ban on certain trains to certain venues, oblique events. I'm not sure I can remember which concerts were the ones that you could drink to and which ones you couldn't drink to, but I'm not even going to list them. Would you support that kind of policy, though, a more focused approach on trains where alcohol shouldn't be allowed and therefore it can be policed properly rather than a blanket ban?
So that is an option that has been looked at, and that in fact was in place pre-pandemic. So there were certain events or certain times of the year or destinations that a ban might have been put in place for, so that could be one way to resolve the challenge.
Jan, I'm not going to be rude by suggesting I know that was in place. I'm asking if you would support it.
Yes, that is something that ScotRail would support.
ScotRail would support that, so there is an option for the Cabinet Secretary there. Bob, the next question is from you. Thank you.
Thanks, Convener. Just a kind of brief one. I've got a kind of personal constituents interest in relation to this because people are always saying to me the Main Hill line's not been electrified, therefore it's not a core part of the ScotRail network, which of course it is, and I know is valued, but East Kilbride is currently coming to completion in relation to electrification. I believe there's no further electrification works in the pipeline. I know there's also other potential solutions to decarbonising Scotland's railways. Are there any planned further electrification works following East Kilbride? What would those alternative solutions look like? And in the abeyance of any further work getting taken forward, is there a skilled workforce that may also fall into abeyance should we decide to pick up and run with electrification somewhere further down the line? Liam, is that one that you're maybe best placed to?
Yeah, I would hope so. Yeah, thank you for the question. I think in Scotland we're really proud of our decarbonisation journey. As we sit here today, 77% of all journeys taken on ScotRail are taken on lines that have been electrified. So that's really great progress so far. Last year we completed the electrification of the Barhead to Glasgow line, and as you quite rightly say, we are on the ground right now with East Kilbride. East Kilbride is due to be completed this year so that ScotRail can operate electric services from East Kilbride to Glasgow by December, from the December timetable change. That's on time and under budget as we stand. There are additional electrification schemes already in the pipeline. So the ones that we're currently on the ground with or in development process are in Fife electrification and in Borders. With both of those schemes, we are doing preparatory electrification work ready for the next stage of funding. So to speak to a specific point on skills, actually, we've got a large number of the East Kilbride team who are already moving over to the Fife project to do that preparatory and that design work. I think when you think about electrification, sometimes it's easy to think that all of the work is just the putting up of the wires. That's clearly the tangible stuff that people see and everything, but there's so much design work that needs to go into that, and we're already transferring some of those skills over to the Fife project.
Okay, now I'm not asking about new rolling stock. Other folk may do that, but I just kind of, first of all, I should point out it's encouraging to see there appears to be a kind of strategy for retaining that skilled workforce and a rolling programme of electrification, but it's been put to me, and there'll be other lines right across Scotland, but my local line never seems to be in the mix, and it's unlikely to be in the mix, and I keep telling commuters it's an absolute valued part of the Scottish rail network, but until we see those rolling stock solutions come out, it's hard to kind of say more about that in a decarbonised railway. Is there anything more you want to say about the parts of the country where it is clear that in the short or medium term there's going to be no electrification?
So I think it's important that the rolling programme of electrification, as we refer to it, is really important for the retention of skills. And in Scotland, we deliver electrification for considerably less than it is being delivered south of the border, and we're improving that year on year. With every project, we come up with new innovations and new ways of doing things. So we're driving down the cost of electrification. That means we can do more of it. because it becomes more, the value for money equation is more balanced. We will work with, and we continue to work with Scottish Government through Transport Scotland, and of course with our colleagues in the train operating companies, most notably ScotRail, on what our priorities are. And that work is an ongoing tripartite work stream where we look at, well, what are the next priorities, which lines should we do next in order to benefit the maximum number of people and benefit the Scottish economy as a whole. So that rolling programme, we hope that it can continue because we can continue to deliver value projects over the course of the next 10 to 20 years and decarbonise the whole of Scotland's railway. So in terms of the actual prioritisation and whether it's specific lines, that's largely speaking a job for Transport Scotland to determine what the right priority is. And our role, I think, is to provide as much data as we can to support them and then to deliver what is specified.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Michael, I think you've got a brief question.
Yeah, well, it sounds, Liam, as though the German approach to electrification is paying off if the cost of electrification in Scotland is reducing because of a rolling programme. Can you remind me of what the cost is per kilometre for electrifying a line? If I recall correctly, it used to be around about £1 million. Is it still around that price?
I don't think it was ever as low as £1 million because it's currently about £2 million and we've been improving it. So we've got it down from 2.7 million to 2 million over the course of the last 5 years.
Okay. So, and that's because of that ongoing rolling programme that allows you to keep the skills together.
I think that is a fundamental part of it, yeah, because with each, we've got the same people and they go through a process of doing electrical and they think, oh, we could probably do that a little bit better. There are various ways of lowering the track or increasing the height of structures, which is a key part of the cost base that we can do slightly better each time because we find slightly better ways of doing it. But retention of skills is absolutely critical, I think, to our ability to do that.
Okay, thanks.
Douglas, you can literally come in with a brief question because we need to get on to Martin, who's been sat patiently.
In terms of the East Coast Rail Line, is there plans in place for electrification, or is that something that's beyond the 20-year plan?
So I'm going to say it's both. Sorry to answer in that way, but the rolling programme of electrification covers a variety of different lines, but we anticipate that we will be able to electrify, and we can electrify from the Central Belt through to Aberdeen, using the East Coast North. But the prioritisation and when we do that and how we do that is a matter of ongoing discussion between ourselves, ScotRail and Transport Scotland, and the prioritisation will be determined eventually by Transport Scotland. It's really important when we do these electrification programmes that we do them in harmony with the replacement of the fleet. So there's no point in putting wires up if we don't have electric trains, and there's no point in buying electric trains if we don't have the wires. So it's really important we do those things together, and Transport Scotland will determine the exact order. But I do anticipate that electrifying to the northeast via the East Coast is very much on the agenda for completion within the timescale that you set out.
Sorry, 20 years, that's what I was...
Yeah, within that, we anticipate. Again, it's not my decision to make whether it happens. There'll be funding decisions, but we can certainly deliver that programme, and we think it's an important one.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Now, Martin, your time is upon us where you get to answer some questions. Did you want to clarify something on grants that are available for rail freight before we go into questions? Or...
Yes, of course, Convener, and thank you, Committee. In the briefing pack, you may have noticed some comments there about grants available, particularly the Freight Facilities Grant and the Motor Shift Revenue Support Grant. This current year, there's money in the pot in the Scottish Budget for the Freight Facilities Grant. The document suggested that the Motor Shift Revenue Support Grant is also available. Technically, it's a UK scheme. It does exist. It's not currently funded in Scotland, though. That budget line was taken out of the budget last year and this year.
In fairness, Martin, it was in the budget, wasn't it? It was about £750,000, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. I think it ran about 700,000 a year.
Yeah, so it was in the budget last year, but isn't in the budget this year. Thanks for covering that. Sarah, I think you've got some questions on that.
Sorry, Convener, it wasn't in last year either.
Oh, sorry, the year before it was in. Yeah. So it's 2 years it's out now, yeah. Sorry, Sarah.
Thanks. No, my question follows on quite well because it is about how do you invest in the new technologies for our rail networks, whether it's hydrogen, electrics, and the barriers we need to overcome. And it's definitely something that came from the Rail Freight Group when they came into Parliament just a few weeks ago last month to talk about how you join up the infrastructure, ferries and rail, and how you enable the sector to actually make better use of our railways. And strategically, Central Belt to Inverness was mentioned. Port of Cairnryan was mentioned. There were blockages right across the country where you need that investment to get the opportunities to actually decarbonise our transport and take a lot of HGVs off very, very busy roads, which would be good for a number of reasons.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you want to come back in on that issue.
Yeah, no, of course, and thanks for the question. I think there's a couple of points in there in terms of the actual use of decarbonised traction. That's ultimately a commercial decision for the individual freight operating companies. Some of them operate only diesel traction, some of them operate a mix of diesel and electric traction, and some companies are investing in what they call bimode or tri-mode traction, which you'll start to see on the network later this year and into next year, which is effectively a battery electric and in some cases a diesel engine as well, to allow freight operators to operate services that are under the wires, and quite often our origins and destinations aren't on the wires, are not on routes and corridors that aren't wired. So I'm very pleased to hear about rolling electrification, because what that does is allow operators the confidence to invest in electric traction and decarbonised traction. In terms of the infrastructure, I think one of the things that would really help with the strategic investment that you spoke about is Scotland's obviously got some thoughts about an industrial strategy on the production of sustainable aviation fuel, hydrogen, carbon capture, and different sort of industrial investments, not least looking at Grangemouth as well, and what might be done there. And I think where our comments at the session you referred to linked to was that to get the best out of those opportunities, I think you have to look beyond the isolated location and what you might do in terms of investment in a plant or in a facility, and look more broadly at how that plant might be served by transport. Some of these commodities will be fairly singular in their point of consumption. Their destinations might be widespread and they might be quite high volume and suit themselves to rail transport. You know, some of them might be hazardous products. So by thinking about how you invest in sort of the industrial architecture, and you might include the green free ports in this, how do you translate the aspirations for those locations into the connecting infrastructure as well? And that might be looking at the plans for upgrading the infrastructure, for creating gauge-cleared routes, perhaps we're looking at some of the electrification for some of these locations. So when they get developed, you've got a much greater opportunity of our sector, which is obviously completely commercial and private sector led, being able to put in place commercially viable services to support those investments.
So how do you think we actually make it happen? Because it's kind of right across the country, whether it's north-south up to the Highlands, whether it's linking into ferries. How do you actually make this happen so that commercial investment does actually happen and you get more use of our railways for freight, which is like a win-win all round? Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it comes to, if you like, more of a high-level strategy, and it cuts across, the transport plans in Scotland, land use planning, industrial policy, perhaps, port policy, and thinking quite long-term. I guess some of these investments, whether it is on the infrastructure or whether it is at the investment locations, are by definition fairly long-term investments over 10 or 20 or 30 years. Our sector operates in a world which is very much demand-driven and responsive to commercial needs in a much shorter time frame. So it's quite difficult for our sector to sort of take an approach you might do with passenger trains, where you can sort of design a service set around a rolling stock and a piece of infrastructure and a plan to create a service group. You almost have to kind of say, this is the destination where we want to get to enable that to happen. We need to have a corridor that has the capability, the gauge, electrification perhaps. And if all of those things are then in place, when it comes to
the customers of these locations engaging with the transport solutions, freight operators are then in a much better position to configure services which are ultimately commercially viable and you know, are competitive with what's inevitably a road-based alternative. But that happens at a much shorter time frame.
So are there roundtables? Are there intergovernmental dialogues on the go? Because the cross-party discussion we had was really supportive to the freight rail industry, but it felt like there was just a long list of things that need to be happening, both strategically and then in different locations.
I think it's certainly something we need to work a little bit more harder at. I think the infrastructure and the long-term planning is very much in the gift of the government and what they want to do. We've got quite a close relationship with colleagues at Network Rail and work very collaboratively with Transport Scotland as well. In some ways, I think the nature of the projects you're talking about sit even higher than that. And it's sort of taking that sort of very long-term view as to what Scotland wants to look like from an industrial strategy point of view and working down from there. So some of these locations, if you think about ports, they're not going to move. They'll always be in that place. By and large, we all live in similar locations that aren't going to move either. So there are some fixed points in there. So it's how you join that up over the long term with a wider strategy.
I don't know if anyone else has got a view on that.
Well, yeah, maybe I'll offer a bit of a view. You know, we are really lucky, I think, in Scotland because Transport Scotland and Scottish Government have been so supportive of rail and particularly supportive of rail freight as well. So my 5-year control period settlement includes a series of 87 deliverables in their high-level output specification. And many of those actually refer directly to freight. So I'm charged with improvements that relate to infrastructure that benefits passenger operations, but also freight operations. We've got a freight growth target within our plan. We've got a freight performance target and various other measures in there that require us to work closely with the freight industry to help develop the opportunities for freight across Scotland. We've got a dedicated freight team and we're really integral, I think, in those discussions with the freight community, whether that be the freight operators themselves or the freight group or indeed with potential end-use customers as well. So it's a really clear focus from Transport Scotland that flows all the way through to ourselves, and we work very closely with the freight industry to make these things happen. Ultimately, there's an amount of money that's available to improve the infrastructure, and it's up to government to choose its priorities. But we can provide really good options, whether it's improving journey time or improving connectivity or things like that, can really help the freight industry to make decisions based on an improved infrastructure they can have confidence in.
Have you got a summary of that list of proposals where its actual infrastructure is going to be changed and improved? Because I think that would be useful for the committee to see strategically, particularly given Martin's comments about it needs to link into an industrial strategy. And when you're doing innovative stuff like hydrogen fuel cells, how you actually join up the dots on all of this so we could see what's going to happen next.
Yeah, I'm sure we've got something that we can share with you after the committee that you might find interesting. We've got various strategies in this space, so we'll pick and we'll send you something.
Yeah, thanks, because it really links in quite nicely to what's next in terms of the climate update that happens next month. So very much appreciate that. Thank you.
I've got a couple of quick questions. Martin, you talked about the modal shift grant that had been lost, 700 odd thousand, I can't remember the exact figure. Do you think that was a significant loss, and could you just quantify it?
Significant in terms of, I would say its immediate impact 12-18 months ago when it was first announced that it would be cut. Because that, as a revenue support grant, it supported traffic that's running today, primarily intermodal traffic, which is about 60% of Scottish traffic. About 70-80% of that is cross-border traffic, so it's very long-distance traffic. So it actually has quite a large bearing on the net ton kilometres that the industry likes to measure. I'd suggest it also has a bearing on Liam's targets for freight growth because it makes up quite a proportion of that. So by taking away or not funding that support mechanism, within Scotland. It still exists south of the border. Obviously, some of those flows veered towards being less commercially viable, and particularly in the intermodal sector, it's a very transferable commodity. It's not like a train full of aggregates. You could put a container on the back of a truck tomorrow, so you lose those flows quite easily. So the economics started to flow, and it's quite interesting. In the last 12 months or so, you've seen an increase in intermodal traffic across the UK. But the maritime intermodal up to Scotland has actually decreased. So while I can't tell you whether that's a direct consequence of losing that grant support north of the border, we've definitely seen a divergence in what's happening here as opposed to other parts of the UK.
Okay, so I think what you're saying is that it will have resulted in more lorries on the road than carrying freight than freight on trains. It would have reduced the amount of freight on trains.
Yeah, I would suggest it probably has. I couldn't pin it down exactly. We're in a dynamic market. You know, lots of things happen. We're at the mercy of the pricing of road haulage and that sort of thing. So it's always a bit variable. But certainly it's difficult to think it hasn't had an impact. Put it that way.
So one of the things about freight trains is making sure that they leave on time, which is one of the areas that we heard about, and they're fully laden when they go. So my understanding, I might have got this wrong, and you can tell me if I've got it wrong, that a container going on a train can travel up fully laden at 48 tonnes. Is that right?
It can travel at 44 tons. Well, the container weight.
Well, not the weight that is allowed on the road, because I'm going to come to that. I'm asking what weight it can travel up on the train, because I thought there was a scheme proposed to allow containers to be fully laden on trains that then could transfer for a short distance to a dispersal terminal, so that they could be broken down and then pushed out at a lower level. So I think it was 48 for 48, I seem to remember.
That is a proposal. It's not a legal limit. The road legal limit is 44 tonnes.
I understand that.
So the weight of the container on the train is ultimately, if it's going to go on the public road at either end, is going to be capped by that.
But surely if the train is to be fully laden and carrying as much freight as possible, you want to get as much in. And if there is a short bit that you have to transfer the 44 tonne on the road to a slightly greater tonne to allow it to get a terminal, surely that would help people. I'm thinking about people across Scotland who are wanting to move their stuff on rail rather than things. So would you support that principle?
It's not something that's supported by all of our members, I'll say. I know it is supported by several. But ultimately, that's a road regulations issue that is a national decision.
Okay. I'd just like to see everything running at full capacity rather than not running at full capacity, and that includes the trains, because it means that I meet and everyone else meets less lorries on the road.
I would suggest, convener, actually the weight is one thing, cube is another. If you think about cube, if you think about the things that we consume, quite often they're fairly lightweight goods. So it's sometimes not about the weight, but actually the volume. And that's why you see a lot of, particularly within the UK, containers at 45 foot and even 50 foot. I saw one yesterday which operate only within the UK, which maximises the length in the cube within the container. So you can get more in it that way, more pallets.
Another dimension to add to it. Kevin, you wanted to ask a supplementary.
Thank you, Convener. And my question is basically for Liam, but maybe with a wee supplementary for Martin. And that's around about the investment in rail freight facilities. Wraith's Farm to the north of Aberdeen is a white elephant, in my opinion, an opinion that's shared by many. That investment, a lot of that came from planning consent. How do we ensure that in future investment that we make, whether it be public money or monies that come from elsewhere, to enhance rail freight facilities are the right ones? How do we engage with the rail freight industry? And my supplementary for Martin is, do you actually feel engaged and listened to? So Liam first, please.
Okay, thank you for the question. So I think in the last certainly the last 5 to 10 years, we in Network Rail have got a lot closer to the freight industry, and I think we've not always demonstrated that care for the industry, but we absolutely do now. We work very closely with the freight industry, as I've already sort of set out, and of course with Transport Scotland. That's why so many items within the HLOS refer directly to freight, 'cause it's encouraging us. Not that we need the encouragement, but it does encourage us further to work with freight, so that the decisions that are taken generally by Transport Scotland on what we do on behalf of the Scottish Government, and we will fulfil the obligations that they require of us in terms of that delivery. But a lot of the work that goes into that is my strategy team talking to colleagues in the freight industry and colleagues in eventual end users, so that we make sure that the business cases we put together are sufficiently robust, so that we don't see that transition into white elephant status. It's then, I think, for the freight industry to work with us once something has been built to make sure that we can grow it, the proof of concept is strong enough, and that we can deliver a sufficiently reliable railway experience for those users, so that they can have confidence that the product's going to get to where they want it to get on time. So there's a variety of different things there. I don't know if Martin wanted to add to that.
Do you feel engaged and listened to, Martin?
That's a question.
Quickly, Martin, sorry.
Yes, right at the end of the session, yes. Yeah, I think we're improving. I mean, we're always at the back of the agenda, which, it was quite humorous in a way. But, yeah, I think certainly we've seen a marked improvement within Transport Scotland, within Network Rail Scotland, and I'd say Network Rail more broadly across the UK, particularly with the freight growth targets starting to come in. What that has really done has aligned incentives, aligned interests, placed obligations on the infrastructure to provider to consider us and what our needs are. And I'd say that also reflects on, how you sort of tackle passenger services as well. We're quite fortunate here. There is a willingness to tweak passenger timetables to create paths for freight and things like that. And that's sort of the net result of some of the targets. So I think in terms of policy and how sort of government sort of influences Network Rail, which helps us, it's those sorts of mechanisms which do really, really help.
Right, now I've got I've got 4 quick-fire questions, which are going to be directed at one person each, I think, hope, because I'm really short of time. So I'd ask you to be succinct as possible in your questions and your answers. So we'll go. Michael, you've got the first one.
Thanks. I want to just return to the issue of new technologies for decarbonising the rail network, but particularly on the passenger side. So large parts of the rail network presently are not electrified and are unlikely to be electrified in the next couple of decades. What approach is ScotRail taking to identify other technologies that could be deployed that would help to reduce the carbon output of its existing diesel sets? And in doing that, how are you going about achieving that in a way that helps you deliver economic benefit to Scotland in terms of job creation and the development of technology here in Scotland?
Now, just before you answer that question, linked to that question, I didn't know that was the question, Bob has got a question specifically on A-type. So could you just throw that into the mix as well?
Just very briefly, I think it's a very important question the Deputy Convener has raised. Earlier on, and this would be for Joanne Maguire to comment on if she was able to, I mentioned that it was clear that not all parts of Scotland's rail network will be electrified, but it must all be decarbonised. I also made the point that in my part of the world, if you're not on the list for electrification, questions are then asked about the long-term future for your line. I specifically mentioned the Maryhill line, Glasgow through to Anniesland. I've had repeated commitments. It is core and of value to ScotRail, and there are other technology out there such as hydrogen fuel and battery electric. So I'd just like something on the record from ScotRail today to say that just because every part of the rail network is not electrified does not mean it's not of equal value for passengers, including passengers in my constituency of Glasgow, Maryhill and Springburn.
So there you are, Joanne. Very quick answer. Some leeway.
I will take the challenge. So with regards to decarbonisation and our fleets, so Over the next 15 years, around 2/3 of our fleets will need replaced, so they'll no longer be suitable for use. And a great example of the work we've done in terms of decarbonising Scotland Railway and looking at replacing a fleet is the joint work that was done between ScotRail and Network Rail in order to build the business case for the replacement of the intercity fleets, which will improve not just intercity routes but also Borders and Fife, which are two other main diesel routes when the new fleet is procured. In terms of other technologies, we are exploring other technologies, some which are very new, conscious that we are spending significant amounts of public money and we're making 30-year decisions because that's the likely lifespan of any new fleet. So we are looking at hybrid trains. So a bit like your car, are there hybrid options in terms of parts of journey under electric wires, parts that would then be battery operated in areas that can't be electrified? And coming back to jobs, trying to be succinct, we are looking at opportunities as to how contracts are set up to ensure that, for example, the maintenance of any new fleet remains with ScotRail and wouldn't be outsourced. As one of the ways in which we're ensuring that we are keeping jobs related to fleet within Scotland. I don't know if you want me to enlarge it. I'm conscious of time, convener.
Yeah.
Well, I would come back in that. I'm just trying to. I understand what you're saying in terms of potential for battery electric. That will only take you so far. So you're still going to have to use diesel. So what are you doing to look at reducing the carbon output from any units you've got in the future that are using diesel? And are you doing that in a way that can help to create economic activity here in Scotland?
Yeah. So a significant part of the current ongoing procurement process takes into account the opportunity to reduce the very significant diesel emissions that we have from our current intercity fleet, and that will be a key part of the decision making around procuring any replacement fleets. As regards jobs in Scotland, ultimately procurement decisions are led by Transport Scotland, or policy decisions are led by Transport Scotland, and we will work with them and have a clear message from them about how we can create jobs in Scotland. But we don't have a definitive answer on it just now, Michael.
Okay.
Mark, I think you've got a question for Graham, have you?
Yeah, for Joanne and Liam.
Well,
so,
we'll see.
Well, okay. So, Graham, I just wanted to ask you about to what extent Cali Sleeper is going after kind of short-haul aviation sector market, and if you are, then what kind of changes you may be looking to make in terms of, you know, procurement of carriages, couchettes, or a different offering, or maybe the offering that you've got works fine as a business model.
Well, thank you for the question. I mean, we are naturally, one of our competitors are that short-term aviation market, and we want to show the advantages of using the sleeper service as a really viable alternative to that. In our more recent marketing campaigns, they've been very focused on driving really on those unique selling points that we offer, and away from just the train journey itself, but the wider benefit of using sleeper that can be brought from the service of we're taking you from city to city. So we were not requiring you to get up very early in the morning to go and get one of those horrible red-eye flights. We're not making you go and take a hotel room the night before. You need to be in the city centre of either London or in Scotland. So real focus around how we promote the benefits of our service. In terms of what may come next and how we may grow our service, of course we are naturally thinking about what could that look like. We are at the very early stages of that, but where we do have an opportunity and where we are able to gain support and funding from government, then we would be delighted to look at how we can expand the service and look at what is the right product for taking any more of the gap of the market that we can take.
Okay. Then Joanne and Liam, you'll be aware that there are strong business cases that are building up across Scotland that are outside of the control period for investment in reopened stations and in some cases reopened halts, such as Newborough. From your perspective, Joanne, does the reopening these rail halts and stations provide a kind of long-term revenue opportunity for ScotRail? And then for yourself, Liam, do you think there's the capacity within the sector to really be, developing that supply chain and picking up some of the smaller opportunities that exist beyond the control period. Joanne.
Sorry, can I just urge, well done, Mark, for rolling two questions out to two different people. So can I ask you to be very, very brief, because I am conscious we've got other things to deal with and it's been quite a long session, so brevity would be appreciated. Joanne.
No problem. So we're always looking for new revenue opportunities, Mark, but there is a balancing act, for example, against any impact that might have on journey time, where we've got commuter-led lines. We are working with lots of local transport partnerships who are building the cases for reopening or new stations and lines. But yes, any revenue opportunities are welcomed by ScotRail, but as I say, there is a broader decision to be made in my attempt to be succinct.
Liam, brief.
Yep, I will try and be equally succinct. Yes, we've got a really good relationship with the supply chain. We've developed some great opportunities in that space, but we work very closely with any interested parties who want to develop the railway, want to develop new stations. I was recently at Rangers Football Club talking to them about the possibility of a station there, exactly that sort of thing. So we're really open to it. If the funding comes, we can find best ways of doing it and all that sort of stuff. We just need the money and then we can deliver it.
Great, thanks for that.
Thank you. I think we've... Douglas, you...
It was just brief, Convener. It was to
Not
Graham.
to two people, and
no,
brief,
just
but to one person.
Just to Graham. When I look at the availability between Aberdeen and London for next month in terms of the sleeper service, there's hardly any availability at all. So you spoke about growing service. What do you actually mean there? What would that mean for that connection? Would it mean more trains, longer trains? What are you talking about?
So, from a Caledonian Sleeper point of view, we are currently, I guess, constrained sounds like a harsh word, but we're constrained by the length of platforms. Yep. So just now we are the longest passenger service that operates in the UK, and in the stations that we operate within, the platforms would need to become longer for us to make the current services longer. So what does that mean in our heads? Where do our thoughts go? Our thoughts go around what would more services look like? What would that bring? What would that mean in terms of what we do with the existing set of rolling stock that we have? And what would any potentially new rolling stock offer in terms of supplementing key routes to allow us to maintain the overall length of the train, but be able to provide more capacity where the demand is for it?
That was your one question, Douglas, and we avoided getting on to zonal pricing or pricing, flexible pricing when there's high demand. So I'm sorry about that we didn't get there. What? Dynamic pricing. I couldn't get the word out. Thank you, Deputy Convener. So I'm sorry, we have come to the end of our session. Thank you very much, all of you, for giving evidence. I'm sorry, Martin, to have kept you waiting to the end, and Graham, only to give you a small chance to come in at the end, having had a bit earlier. So thank you very much. We're now going to move into private session.